IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's actually kind of a special edition, Ryan. I mean, I know we've been doing shows all summer, but this show officially kicks off our 2023 Notre Dame football coverage because, man, it is game week, dude. It is, I can't believe it. It doesn't feel like it. It's August 22nd. I'm still kind of in the finish up camp mode, but man, it is game week. Notre Dame kicks off in 4 days against Navy. Ryan, you and I have spent hours upon hours upon hours talking about this Notre Dame football team in 2023, both on the show and in our own personal conversations. And in 4 days, Ryan, we're going to get a chance to see what Notre Dame is all about. I cannot wait. And they're going to kick the season off in Dublin, Ireland, against the Naval Academy, the Midshipmen from the Naval Academy, the middies who do not run the midline that often, nearly enough anyway. 2:30 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, Ryan, at Aviva Stadium, as I said, in Dublin, Ireland. Notre Dame is a 20.5-point favorite right now. I was asked this morning if I would take that, and I said, man, I would. First of all, I'm not a bettor, but I would never take an opening weekend spread line against a triple option team with brand new coaches because you just never know. But big weekend for Notre Dame, Ryan. We're going to finally get a chance to see what this Notre Dame football team is all about. They're not going to be defined by what happens this weekend, but it's our first glimpse of what this team is going to be and what it's going to look like.
Well, I think that the offseason has a lot of layers to me, right? There's moments of extreme excitement. There's moments of, and this is kind of like the fall camp scenario, right? As far as like you feel really good, and then you hit a little bit of a wall where you're like, maybe this isn't going to be as good as we thought. Maybe we should second guess this. Maybe we're not quite as strong in this position group. Maybe we're stronger in this position group. Like we've been having kind of that battle back and forth over the last few weeks of, is this team as good as we think? Are they as ready to take that next step? And fortunately, Brian, like this week leading up to the first game is always one of those weeks where everyone has hope. I mean, every football program out there in college football, you feel good about your prospects. You feel good about what's happening. You are excited about what is about to unfold in front of your eyes. And this is the ultimate excitement. And the fun parts of being an analyst is that soon we will have a very good understanding of what we were right about, what we were wrong about, and everything in between. So this is like a fostering of every feeling that we have about Notre Dame football, the excitement, the angst, the nervousness, but also the clarity for what the 2023 Notre Dame team is going to look like. And it's kicking off soon, man. So, I mean, no season like football season, buddy. No season.
You know, Ryan, this time of the year is always, I think, for me, the most exciting because of that unknown. You know, the unknown of, is this team what I think it's going to be? Is it gonna be better than I think? Is it going to disappoint? You know, there's always sort of that. I study Navy film and I study Notre Dame film and I study Kennesaw State film. I'm thinking, yeah, Notre Dame should dominate this game, and then I have a million reasons to talk myself into why I'm not as confident in that. You know, and that's just that back and forth because there still is so much unknown about both of these teams. But,
Sure.
you know, when we do previews down the road, we're going to talk about what teams have done that season. We're going to be able to pop in film of what those teams have done. With Navy, you know, it's like if I'm studying the Navy option, I have barely watched any Navy film the last 2 weeks. It's all been Kennesaw State film. It's all been studying what Kennesaw State does because they have a new offensive coordinator. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. Let's just talk a little bit about that matchup, Ryan. Obviously, this is going to be, I believe, the 96th time that Notre Dame and Navy have played each other. The series began in 1927, and the only time they have not played since 1927, Ryan, was 2020 because of all the COVID nonsense. They played every year during World War II, but obviously during the COVID year, they didn't play because of just how everything that went down that season. Notre Dame holds an 81-13-1 advantage. I was shocked when we first started doing the series history a couple of years ago. I was shocked that there's only one tie in this game, in this series. I just figured there'd be a lot more ties because I just kind of feel like the option when you're just talking about the power running and the way those two teams played for years, I would have assumed that, but they didn't. Notre Dame has won 5 straight in this matchup, and I believe 10 of the last 11, the exception being the 2016 season when Notre Dame lost to Navy in Jacksonville by a point. Navy's got a new head coach this year, Ryan, as well. It's a new era, right? Ken Niumatalolo was a part of the Navy program for over 20 years. First as their offensive coordinator under Paul Johnson, then he took over and really built Navy into a really, really quality program. Ryan, obviously, a couple of years ago, Navy decided to make the decision to jump into the AAC, the American Athletic Conference. And for those first couple seasons, Navy was pretty good. They played in the conference championship in both years. Went 11-2 in 2015, and went 9-5 in 2016. And that followed a stretch of his first 7 years at Navy. They won at least 8 games every season. He had a pair of 9 wins and a 10 win. And then, of course, the pinnacle was that 11-2 season in 2015, followed by a 9-5 season. Then fell off a little bit next couple of years, 7-6, 3-10, and then had a bounce back in 2019. They went 11-2. Of course, Notre Dame beat them pretty convincingly. But over the next 2 years, Ryan, they just went 11-25. And this past season, they got rid of Coach Niumatalolo, who had done a lot of really, really good things for Navy. Replaced him with I always want to say Brian Chestnut because I combined Brian Newberry and Grant Chestnut, the offensive coordinator's name, together, but it's Brian Newberry, who is a first-time head coach, never been a head coach before. This is his first job. He has been at Navy since 2019. He took over as defensive coordinator. He's the guy that led, I think it's the stat I had, Ryan, in the article today was, I think about like 31 points a game, something like that, the 3 years before he arrived. And they've given up about 26 since then, but they had one season that kind of puffed that up a little bit. Last year, they gave up 24 points a game. I would argue their 24 points a game was way too high for how good that defense was at times last season. Their offense was just so bad. They just kept giving teams the football, and their offense could do nothing. They only averaged 21.9 points per game, but it was a really good, it was a salty defense, I think is a way of putting it. Not an overly talented defense. We've seen far more talented Navy defenses in recent seasons, but it was a really well-coached, aggressive attacking defense. Now, he becomes head coach, and you've got this really interesting Kennesaw State connection. His defensive coordinator, who's been at Navy for a few years, came with him from Kennesaw State because obviously Brian Newberry came from Kennesaw State. He's a defensive coordinator since the program's inception. I believe he started there in 2013, 2014. They didn't actually start playing games till 2015. Him and Grant Chestnut came in together. When he was promoted to head coach, he brought in Brian Chestnut as the offensive coordinator, PJ Volkers, the defensive coordinator. They were all together at Kennesaw State. Now, you're like, what is this Kennesaw State connection? Here's what it is. Brian Bohannon is the head coach at Kennesaw State. He took over. He's been the only coach they've ever had. Again, they started playing football in 2015. He came from Navy. So that's sort of that back and forth. And so there's that connection between the two teams. That's why Kennesaw State's always been an option team. So really interesting background, Ryan. And there's been some people saying, are they going to go away from the option? Hard for me to think he's going to do that when you consider this guy's been part of a program that's done that for so long. And his first hire was to go hire a guy from Kennesaw State whose philosophy has its roots back to really the Ken Niumatalolo, Paul Johnson era of some really good football at Navy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were going to trend away from the triple option, you're probably going to find a quarterback coach somewhere, and like a young and kind of energetic staff that's kind of putting together some interesting offensive structures, right? I mean, that consists. And for people that don't know Kennesaw football, I mean, to your point, Brian, it is run eerily similar to what we've seen of Navy. You know, it really is. You talk about the triple option, but even when we talk about defense, I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of 3-man fronts and a lot of movement on the second and third level, a lot of aggressiveness. I mean, they are mirror images of one another because they understand in order for each of their programs to compete, they have to slow the game down a little bit. They have to control the clock. They have to maintain possession, not shoot themselves in the foot. There's a low margin for error usually for these teams that choose to run the triple options for whatever reason, you know, from a talent perspective, depth perspective, and anywhere in between. So yeah, that connection does definitely lead you to believe that that is where this thing is trending, that it's going to be consistent with the triple option. I know a lot of people are talking about the rotating of quarterbacks, which we'll talk about, talking about the uncertainty. So will there be wrinkles on top of what they do? Sure. I'm sure there will be. But I still think that there's a baseline foundation of the triple still being intact at Navy.
That's right. Somebody said they are forced to run the triple option due to the personnel they have. To a degree, yes, but I also, I mean, there's a reason the academies all run some form of the option. Right now, they all run a different version of it, which is kind of interesting. Navy's always been more of a veer team. Air Force has always been a little bit more of a flex bone team, and then Army's more of a midline team. So it is kind of interesting, but this is going to be an interesting matchup, Ryan, and it's one that I always don't look forward to, but also do look forward to. And I would encourage everyone who, especially younger folks who maybe don't know the history of this series. I understand why some don't want to play it. I would encourage you to go to irishbreakdown.com and read the story that is on our front page, and it's titled Forged in Blood, Notre Dame versus Navy, a series Forged in Blood. It was written by Andrew McDonough, who's a contributor to Irish Breakdown a couple of years ago. And he and I just decided, you know what, we're gonna publish this every year of Navy Week, just to remind people of why this series matters and why Notre Dame should show loyalty to Navy, and not a loyalty, but a reverence for the Naval Academy and for Navy and what they've done. So I would encourage everybody to check that out. Let's get into a little bit more specifics of this particular game, Ryan. And for those who are questioning, today we will have a mailbag today. Next 2 days, we won't have mailbags after our shows, but today we will. So if you do have questions, go and throw those in there. Let's talk, before we dive deeper into Navy, Ryan, let's talk about this game from a Notre Dame standpoint and what this game means for Notre Dame. This game does absolutely nothing for Notre Dame from the standpoint of proving their national worth. There's nothing Notre Dame is going to do that's going to make anyone say, oh, wow, they beat a 4-8 Navy team. They've arrived. But I do think this is an important game for Notre Dame for some obvious reasons that it's true for everyone. You get a chance to kick your season off. It's your first chance to play football. But I also think it's an opportunity for Notre Dame, Ryan, to be on a bit of a spotlight. I mean, look, people are thirsting for football, and the only game being played at 2:30 on Saturday is going to be the Notre Dame game. The rest of the games don't start till that evening. So you are going to be on a little bit of a national spotlight, and it's going to be our first chance to really see what this football team is all about, Ryan. We are not going to get all our answers about who this Notre Dame team is going to be in the first 2 weeks. We just aren't. Because Notre Dame could go out there on Saturday and dominate, and then dominate again next Saturday against Tennessee State. And we still don't really know how good this football team is going to be, because these really aren't very good football teams at this point. I mean, if we're being honest. But I still think it's an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out and show themselves, because sometimes, Ryan, I think you can show me something as an analyst when you are playing an inferior opponent. It tells me a little bit about your leadership. So I think what we're going to learn from Notre Dame this weekend is, does this team love playing together, right? You see it all the time, these really good teams. Like, this team just loves playing together. I felt that about Georgia last year, even more so than the year before. The year before, I just thought they were really good. Last year just looked like a team that liked playing together, liked being together, and would battle through some different things. And so we're going to find out if that team is that way, Ryan. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is, does this team play with confidence? Does this team play with speed? And does this team play with fire? When you're playing a team you're supposed to beat. It's easy to get up for Ohio State, Ryan, but can you get up for this Navy game? That's something I'm looking forward to seeing if they can do that this weekend when we talk about sort of what's in it for Notre Dame this year.
Well, I think you could also kind of parlay it to what you saw last year for Notre Dame. If there was a lot of good that I think came out of year one under Marcus Freeman, but we've talked about it, right? There was last few years under Brian Kelly, it had become Brian Kelly beats every team he should beat, right? Every team. And last year, Notre Dame lost a couple games to teams that they just have no business losing to, right? And I think that, one, you'll get a little bit of a different understanding of Marcus Freeman to kick off this year, because you'll see that there's an attention to detail to just burying the inferior teams, quote unquote, right? I think you can kind of calm that nerve a little bit. And also, Brian, like, honestly, every team is different, right? It's all like a chapter to a book. There's no doubt about that. But this almost feels like two different tenures for me, which I know is probably a little bit hyperbolic, but like not fully, right? Like last year in year one under Marcus Freeman, you had a first-year head coach, which you had a lot of questions about as far as like, what would that look like? You've never seen him as a head coach before. He also had an inexperienced quarterback. He had some inexperience in general. I mean, that team was loaded with a bunch of sophomores last year. Like, that was the bulk of your team, at least offensively, that you were like hoping that Lorenzo Styles and Logan Diggs and Audric Estime and Tyler Buckner and the two offensive tackles,
Blake Fisher, yeah,
right. It was
Mitchell
a
Evans was your number 2 tight end.
it was
Yeah.
a heavy sophomore year last year for offense. So it was a young team, it was a unproven team, and it was a team that had some question marks. This year feels a lot different because a lot of those kids that got thrown into the fire last year as younger kids played. A lot of them played last year. And also, you now have Sam Hartman coming in as a 6th-year senior and a proven known commodity. So I think expectations are always the same at Notre Dame as far as you're going to try to compete for national championship. You're going to try to make the playoffs. That's the standard, right? But I think if the reasonable expectations is that there was some forgiving that happened last year during the season because you're like first year head coach, young football team, inexperienced football team in some spots, quarterback got hurt, yada, yada, yada. All those things kind of added together. This year, you have a quarterback that's played a lot of football games. You have guys that were sophomores and juniors last year that are now entering a year 2 of much higher experience level under this coaching staff. And then you have the natural maturation of year 2 under Al Golden on the defensive side of the football. So this almost feels like 2 completely different tenures of Notre Dame football, which again, hyperbolic to a degree, but I think the expectations this year are a lot higher than what they were last year. A lot of people just kind of wanted to see what it looked like last year. Like, what's this going to look like? What are the differences going to be? What are the similarities? This year, it feels like Marcus Freeman has complete control of his football team, and we're going to get a much deeper understanding as far as how good can this coaching staff be at the University of Notre Dame with a proven commodity, a quarterback with more experience under the belt. Yes, it's still going to be young in certain areas. There's no doubt about it. We talk about all the true freshmen that are in the 2 deep on this depth chart that was released on Monday, right? But regardless, I think that we just have more of an expectation for what we can expect and hope for what we should expect out of Notre Dame football in 2023.
Here's something else we're going to find out, Ryan, because part of this is you mentioned we're in year 2 of Marcus Freeman. There's still a lot of things we don't know. As of right now, here's who we know Marcus Freeman is because of what we've seen. His teams got off to a slow start, finished strong in a season, get off to a slow start. That was true not just big picture wise as a football team, but also against Navy. You have a 35-13 lead at halftime. You win 35-32. That's how that game played out last year. You look at the way the season started. They started off 0-2 last year, seemed to right the ship against North Carolina, and to a degree BYU, and then you lose again. You actually won 3 in a row. You got Cal, UNC, and then BYU. And then you lose a game to Stanford. So that's who Marcus Freeman is because of that's all we know. So here's the question. We're going to find out, in my opinion, partly of, again, doesn't define who this team is long term and who it's going to be in 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 10 weeks, but we will learn. Was last year just Marcus Freeman being a first-time head coach, playing against a really tough early season schedule, right, against 2 quality football teams that combined to win 20 games last year, right? Ohio State and Marshall combined to win 20 games last year.
Yep.
Or is he a guy that says, hey, look, that was last year. We have these things happen, all that new staff I was learning and all that. We come out this year against a team we're supposed to beat, and we're going to come out playing fast and playing hard and executing and coming out and say, hey, we're going to start off strong and then build on it. That's something we're going to learn this weekend about Notre Dame. Because, again, with Brian Kelly, he had established track record of who he was in openers. Notre Dame tended to play pretty well in openers. Not always, but for the most part, played really, really well, really going back to 2014 when they just pounded Rice at the beginning of the season. And then you saw in 2015 they beat Texas really good, and obviously 2016 didn't get off to a good start. But I actually thought that was probably Notre Dame's best game of the season offensively. That 2016 game that they lost to Texas, 50-47. But you come out in 2017 and you absolutely obliterate Temple in the opener. Beat Michigan convincingly. I mean, it's no 7-point game, but there was no doubt who the better team was that day. It was certainly Notre Dame. Come out 2019, go on the road, beat Louisville 35-17. 2020, you have a 2-touchdown win at home over Duke. 2021, you don't play great in the fourth quarter. You learn to put a team away, but you still get a road win over Florida State. Going back to Brian Kelly's start at Notre Dame, he'd only lost 2 season openers, I believe, right? You had South Florida back in 2011, and then and you had the game against Texas, and they started off with some good teams at times. And so we kind of knew what we were going to expect. We're still learning about Marcus Freeman. And then here's the other question we have, Ryan. We know what this team was in camp: physical, fast, flying around. How's that going to translate? Can you get this team to as the coaching staff, can you get it to translate into Saturdays? That's going to be another part of what we're going to see from this football team and what we're going to learn beginning on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's about a year of growing pains and maturation, like I kind of said, right? Like that's stuff that I want to see. And honestly, Brian, like I think the best thing that I've been hearing this offseason outside of just like individual gains, right? Each of these players and how they're growing is Notre Dame seems to be playing with a little bit of swagger this offseason. You know, you're hearing about a lot of barking, a lot of talking, but like a healthy amount, right? It's not like a arrogance. It's not like a disrespect. It's just competitiveness. And I think that that's one thing that also has kind of been missing from Notre Dame football in certain years is that there's just some years where just not a lot of juice, man. Like there's not. I mean, last year you heard me say that almost every week. Like I just don't see juice. I don't see guys excited to play football. I don't see that swagger. This offseason, I think that there was an attention to competitive fire and being able to have a little bit of that swagger. So honestly, you know, not a lot of gain on a national perspective, but internal gains I think that could happen with this Notre Dame football team is to come out and punch this team in the mouth, man.
Right.
Like not obviously not literally, but like figuratively come out and really assert your dominance and to have fun doing it. I mean, they need to have fun, man, at the end of the day. Like the best teams, to your point, like the Georgia last year, for instance, some of the best Nick Saban teams, there was just some swagger about those teams, right? Like they just walked around and it wasn't like outwardly arrogance. It's just confidence.
Right. It wasn't like the U in the A. Yes. It wasn't like that. It was just, exactly. Man, they loved playing ball, but they loved playing ball together. That's how some of Lou Holtz's best teams were. I mean, you know, that's how the 2012 Notre Dame team was, Ryan. That's how the 2015 Notre Dame team was. Those guys love playing ball together, right? And like you said, that's something you see. And I'll say this too, Ryan. I didn't see that in Ohio State.
No.
Which is why I felt like they kind of underachieved a little bit. I mean, they went 11-2, but that team should have been better than they were. And you watch Michigan play. I don't think Michigan has the talent that Ohio State has. I know that a lot of Michigan fans will disagree with me, but I don't think they do. But that team plays hard. They play with fire, and they love playing together. And we're going to find out this team does, right? Because I'll say this. Notre Dame's not, you know, announcing to the college football world, we're back by beating Navy 50-10. But I do think it is a resume builder in the from the standpoint of just it's all eyes are going to be on you this weekend. Sure. Like every college football fan is going to be watching that game. Why? Because there's nothing else to watch. They want football to be back, and there's going to be a lot of SEC fans and Big Ten fans and Big 12 fans and Pac-12 fans and ACC fans that want to see Notre Dame fall flat on their face, right? So they're going to be watching for that regard as well. So it does give you a chance to kind of announce yourself a little bit. And how are you going to announce yourself? Because if you look back, some of the best Notre Dame teams that we've seen, in my opinion, kind of announced themselves pretty early. I mean, you think back to the 2012 season. You're coming off of an 8-5 year, very disappointing season for Notre Dame. Obviously went into it very high expectations. Sound familiar? And then they collapsed early. They lost 2 games early and then went on a nice little run. You know, won 8 of their next 9 games, but then played USC and lost by 2 touchdowns. I mean, am I sounding familiar at all? And then they played a really good team at the end of the year and lost in a game where they were competitive, but they just couldn't, you know, they just weren't good enough. Finish 8-4. That sounds really familiar. The difference is that team in 2011 went out in the bowl game and kind of peed down their leg a little bit in the second half and lost to Florida State. This team went out in the bowl game and said, okay, we've got something to prove. And I thought, whooped up on South Carolina pretty good in the last 2.5 quarters of that game. If not for a couple miscues, that game's a blowout. Despite giving up, you know, two interceptions, one that got returned for a touchdown in the first half. Yep. So, you know, we learned something about that team. And then that next year, Ryan, they come out, that team that was so disappointing the year before, lost the opener to 3-9 South Florida team. I think South Florida that year, I believe, Ryan, finished 3-9. Let me go look at it. 5-7. They were 5-7. They were coming off an 8-5 year. They finished 5-7. So they were not a very good football team. But that next year, Notre Dame comes out in Dublin, new quarterback, some new faces on defense, a lot, some changes, some lost Harrison Smith, lost Michael Floyd, lost some really good football players. They came out and announced to everybody that, hey, we're going to be pretty good. And they whooped up on Navy really, really well. You fast forward to that 2015 team. You start the season off against Texas, and you come out and you just light Texas up from beginning to end, win 38-3. The 2018 Notre Dame team that was really good. They jumped all over Michigan early, man. I mean, they were jumping all over Michigan. You had a 21-3, and Michigan returns a touchdown on a kick return for a touchdown to make it 21-10. It really wasn't that close. You had a touchdown to Miles Boykin called back because of an illegal formation that would have made it 28-10 instead of 24-10. So there was some sloppiness from Notre Dame, but they physically dominated Michigan that entire game, and it was a sign of it's going to be a really good football team, and they were. So a lot of the best Notre Dame teams, Ryan, have you start to see who they are early. You look at the 2021 Notre Dame team. That season was so. I'm just trying to think of the right way to say this. That Florida State game was exactly who Notre Dame was all year. Talented, could just out-talent you in games, just had better players than you did. But they were going to be undisciplined. They were going to have flashes, but then make dumb mistakes, drop passes, penalties on defense, and let inferior teams be in games with you. But at the end of the game, our dudes are better than your dudes. They really weren't that great of a team. They just were better than everybody else they played. Was that not just exhibit of who Notre Dame was all year in 2021? And we saw it a little bit last year too, right? And so we do see a little bit of who you are because your identity starts to be seen in the opener. It doesn't define you as a team based on how good you're going to be from an execution standpoint. That stuff's all going to come. But it does begin to define you as far as what kind of football team you're going to be at your core, right? You can, if Notre Dame is sloppy on Saturday, but they are flying around, physical, punishing, and this, the things we point to is like, Sam Hartman missed a couple open guys on deep throws. The defense had a couple missed assignments as they're getting ready for the option, but man, they were playing hard. They were flying around. I'll be happy as long as they get a W. I mean, we'll criticize stuff and we'll be critical of it, but I'm going to be like, hey, man, that stuff can be corrected. When a team comes out and plays with no fire, Ryan, you don't just turn the switch on 2 weeks later when you go to NC State, right? If you're not fired up to play the first game of the season, it's going to tell me a little something about your football team. And that's something that because it shouldn't matter about the opponent. Like, you get a chance to play football as a team for the first time. There should always be some level of excitement, no matter who's on the other side.
Well, and I think the other big layer for me is because there should be exuberance over this game. And I think it's because there are parts of this football team that are very young. And I think that it's also a good thing. We've talked about the stretch to begin the season, especially even outside of Navy, playing against Tennessee State and NC State and Central Michigan the first 4 games of the year, of getting Sam Hartman and the offensive play calling and all that stuff maturated. But I also think, we saw the depth chart, right, Brian, there's a lot of freshmen. They're going to play a lot this year for Notre Dame. And I think that that's another thing of getting this season started off on a good foot is going to give guys like Jaden Greathouse, Jeremiah Love potentially. So maybe Charles Jagasaw gets in the football game at some point. Maybe a couple of those linebackers, the Drake Bowens of the world, the Jay Nosberry, Christian Gray, getting some of those young guys on the field in a big moment, first game of the season, and start getting their confidence flowing a little bit, start breeding into that. Because at the end of the day, there will be some people that if Notre Dame underachieves this year, there will be some people, analysts and fans alike, that look at the team and say, well, they were really young. Sure, they were really young. Well, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse, because I watch every year the Georgias of the world where Bear Alexander is the best defensive lineman on the field for most of a national championship game, for where what's the defensive end? Williams, who's the big number 13 for Georgia. He's a star in the game. Malachi Starks is a freshman All-American for their team on the defensive side of the football. Youth is not an excuse. Youth is a crux that people like to use, a crutch that people like to use for why things didn't happen well. Well, this season, this first game against Navy, it sets up perfectly for some of these young guys that are going to be playing for Notre Dame to get a lot of confidence early on in this season. So I think that this game can really serve a lot of different ways to really get this team feel like they're heading towards the goal and they're having fun getting there, and the confidence starts to exude out of them.
Yeah, right. I'm just like sitting there listening to you getting fired up. Just man, I just can't wait to see what this team is gonna be all about. So that's what's really on the line for Notre Dame is you set a tone, right? I mean, that's what you and I are both saying. If we had to, if we just said it in one sentence, how much fun would that be, right? I mean, we wouldn't explain it, but when it really comes down to it, Ryan, you're setting a tone this weekend. You're setting a tone of who you're going to be. You can build on it, you can improve upon it, but you don't go from no passion to passion in 3 weeks, right?
Exactly.
You're going to find out what this team is about. Clean stuff up, sure. We're going to dive into some different aspects of this matchup tomorrow in my solo show. You and I'll get together on Thursday. We'll do a keys to victory for Notre Dame. We'll dive a little bit into that. Ryan, you've got something special that you're working on this week as well, which won't announce to people yet because I want to make sure that we're able to actually get it done. But it's going to be a really cool look at beating the triple option. I'm really fired up about that. Ryan came to me this morning with that idea, and if we can pull that off, it's going to be pretty awesome. So I'm excited about it. But and then we're also going to have mailbag on Friday. So we got a lot going on. So we're not going to dive into everything about Navy today. What we want to do today, Ryan, is just kind of talk a little bit about who Navy is and about the stressors that they can put on a team, and just some things about about how Notre Dame matches up against it. And we talked a little bit about Navy earlier. Obviously, talked about Brian Newberry as their new head football coach, PJ Volker's their new DC, and Brian Chestnut is Grant Chestnut's their new offensive coordinator. And so, Ryan, when you look at this season, there's unknowns, but at the same time, there's a level of known about Navy because there is a bit of a continuation defensively. You kind of have an idea of what they're going to do. You can kind of look at their film and figure it out. And I want to first talk about the Navy offense because this is the least known of what they are, but we still have some idea. And so I think this triple option is going to look different than the one that Navy had in recent seasons, but it's still going to be the triple option. I mean, there's certain principles that you're going to see on film. When you look at Brian Chestnut, he was 9 years as the offensive coordinator at Kennesaw State. Yes, 9 years. They haven't been playing football for 9 years. He actually started when the program got started. He got hired because usually when you start a program, Ryan, you'll have a coach in place for a year or two before the program starts. And so Brian Chestnut was actually hired before they started playing. And so when they kicked off in 2015, he had been there. As I mentioned before, their head coach was an option guy from Navy. So that kind of built into that. But when you look at it, Ryan, specifically of what Navy brings back personnel-wise, I think it should allow them to make a pretty smooth transition into his offense. You've got 4 starting returners on the offensive line. Both tackles, your center and your right guard, are all back. Their left guard plays. Lou Samoji used to point this out all the time. He said, you look at Navy and you think, hey, new guys, but the way that they play the offensive line, the way they coach the offensive line, the way that their situation is set up, you're not playing. Guys are playing a lot in that system. And so this isn't like Ben Purvis will be their new left guard. He's going to make a smooth transition. Navy, when they have at least 4 starters coming back in the offensive line, their line usually plays well together. Now, what I don't think this is necessarily the most talented Navy line that we've ever seen. And they had some struggles last year, but they are experienced. They have their starting quarterback from last year back, although he's listed as the or in the starting lineup, which we'll get to here in a little bit, Ryan. Bring back some experience at receiver. So obviously they had those guys, their receivers from last year. They've got at least one back from last season as well. And so they actually returned a decent amount, Ryan, which for me is something, and we'll dive into specifics of what that system looks like. But for me, when you're talking about bringing back 7 starters from your offensive line, including your fullback and both wingbacks, one wing back, and then you bring back a starting wide receiver that was your leading receiver last year, plus 4 offensive linemen, that should allow you to make a pretty smooth transition into an offense that is going to look very similar to what you've already done. So you're just doing wrinkles. I mean, terminology is not going to be very different. So I think that whatever they're going to be under Brian Chestnut or Grant Chestnut, they'll show it pretty quickly, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think that you always build from inside out, and I think that's especially true for a triple option, right? Like offensive line and quarterback, and obviously with Levitai back as quarterback as an or, I mean, you have some consistency there, right? You have some reps, you have terminology that I would imagine is similar, right? Like I don't imagine that there's going to be too much carryover that you look at and say like that's completely out of the realm of what we've been doing offensively. I think there's going to be a lot of carryover in that instance. And I really think it starts with the offensive line, man. I think it starts from the inside out for most teams. I mean, that's pretty consistent on every level, right? Is of like if I want an offensive coordinator to come in and have a somewhat seamless transition, yes, it's awesome to have somewhat similar terminology and structure to what we're trying to do, but also you have a proven offensive line coming back, or at least an experienced offensive line and a quarterback that's played. That's great building blocks to work off of, obviously, if you're Navy. So I think that there will be a pretty smooth transition. I would agree because, again, I mean, offensive linemen in the variations of the triple option, like you're cutting a lot, you're moving the same type of angles, you're working to the same spots for the most part. Like there's going to be a lot of carryover, which is why I think that this marriage between Navy and Kennesaw State has kind of been born, right, Brian? It's like they're very familiar with one another, and they are. And I think that, again, I think that Kennesaw State has built their program to mirror Navy in a lot of ways. So I think that that carryover is important for a team, that being consistent and being mistake-free is the only reason that they're going to be competitive and to win football games is by doing those things.
Right, and they started playing football in 2015. They went 6-5 in their first year. They went 8-3 in year 2, and then the next 3 years they went 12-2, 11-2, 11-3. Made it to the postseason every year. Then in 2020 they only went 4-1 because of the weird spring season for FCS and all that. And then in 2021 they went 11-2. Now they fell off last year. Went 5-6 last year. They had a bunch of injuries. Their quarterback got hurt, missed several games, and several other things. But they took a little bit of a step back last year. But I mean, they got rolling quickly at Kennesaw. That's where Brian Newberry came from. He was their defensive coordinator during that early stretch. I mean, he was that 3-year stretch where they went to the college football playoffs in the NCAA. They went to the quarterfinals 2 years, and in 2018 they finished 5th. Nationally that season, made it to the quarterfinals. Brian Newberry was their defensive coordinator. And so, he understands what it's like being a defensive coordinator on an option team. And when you look at Brian Newberry, he knows, or Grant Chestnut, he knows who he is and he knows what they do. So they do, like I said, they return a lot. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we're going to see from Navy this year, Ryan. When you study their film, they will run. I mean, you look, their version of the triple is basically the inside veer, is what I saw from Kennesaw State. That's very similar to what Navy has been. There's the difference basically between midline and the veer. There's a few differences. One is just aesthetically, you see it differently. The midline is the quarterback takes a step back, and it's just right up the center's behind. I mean, you're coming right off his play side butt, and you usually don't see a triple off of the midline. The midline really is a quarterback fullback play. You'll occasionally pitch it, but it's not good to pitch it out of the midline because of just the angle. You're pitching it backwards a little bit more. It's harder to kind of get a flow. Now, I did see something interesting from them. They'll occasionally run you and I were talking about this before the show started, but they actually, what I saw from Navy, and I was like, or from Kennesaw State, is I got to go through and find some more film of this because they've really changed how they line up in recent seasons. And one thing that I saw last season that I didn't really see in past seasons, Ryan, and I'm going to pull the clip up right here, is they would line up in the I formation and run some of their stuff. Now, to me, it's a little bit easier to run a midline option out of I formation. It's still not ideal, but I think it gives them a nice little wrinkle. This is them last year against Cincinnati. They'll, of course, line up in the normal triple option look with the double tight, the double bunch with the tight end or the receivers in and in a wing. They'll do a lot of bringing the wings in as lead blockers, which we've seen from Navy a lot. That's not new. We did see them also do a little shotgun last year. I didn't see a ton of shotgun from them in like 18, 19. No. I didn't see it a ton in 21 or 20. in the limited games. The last 2 years they've done it, and I wonder if it's more in relation to the quarterback they had. The kid from Navy the last couple years, he was banged up last year, but you and I were talking about this in 21. He completed like something like 60-some% of his throws. He reminded me of the kid that Navy had back in 2016, just not as big, but he was a dynamic runner, but he's also a really good thrower. And so they've thrown the ball a little bit more. Formationally, it's not going to look a ton different. They like to do overloads at times and get leverages and numbers advantages and things like that. They'll run the midline, which is fullback, quarterback. The base offense is the inside veer. Inside veer basically is coming at the guard. I believe it's coming off the outside hip of the guard is the aiming point. So a lot of times so aiming point is basically from where it's lined up. And so what'll happen a lot of times on the midline veer, or excuse me, the inside veer is you actually get kind of down blocks on that 3 technique by the tackle and the guard, and they'll wash that down. And the veer or the midline, the fullback actually a lot of times end up coming right behind the tackle because of the angle of that down block. But the aiming point is kind of off the guard. It's a little wider. And then that's where you'll get a lot of your triple stuff, where they'll run the pure triples off that inside veer. I haven't seen him do a lot of outside veer, Ryan. I mean, you really don't see that anymore. It's more midline, which is a quarterback fullback. It's inside veer, which is a triple, but more so quarterback pitch. You'll see them give the fullback a bunch on that as well, but you always have the fullback as an option when you're running the option. But this one incorporates more of a true triple, where midline is not really a triple. Veer is more of a triple. They'll run motions where they just jet across as opposed to the back stuff a lot on film, which helps them get numbers. They'll run toss and just toss a ball outside to a wing back. They'll run a kick out play, which is basically a look off of the veer, where the action of the back and the quarterback looks like the veer, but you've got your guard kind of kicking out the end. It's more of a true run play. You'll either hand on like a fullback dive almost like kind of look, or the quarterback may duck inside and kind of just keep the ball. It's not really a triple option. It's a designed run that goes to the fullback or the quarterback. So a lot of stuff that they do that looks like the action of the triple, it's not actually a triple. One of the biggest misnomers that people have about the quote unquote triple option is really good triple option teams don't actually run triple option very often. It's usually there's 2 options, a lot of times. And so they'll run the veer, which is a true triple, but they don't run that like 90% of the time, and so there's a lot of stuff that's designed to go to the quarterback. It's designed to go to the fullback. It's more of a double option. But that's basically what we see from them in the run game, right? It's not going to look like, oh my gosh, we've never seen this before. I think some of the alignments they're going to get to, some of the motions they're going to get to, that stuff's going to look a little bit different. But when it comes down to the run plays, that part is going to be very similar for Notre Dame when you break down the Navy film.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to stopping the fullback and stopping the quarterback. Like,
Bingo.
That's it, right? I mean, the wing backs, even if you are running a true triple, those guys aren't touching the ball a ton. Like, that's why they average a crazy amount of yards per carry, because it's like they're the last option. There you are, and you're outside for a 10-plus yard gain. I mean, that's every year I felt like Navy had a kid that had like 500 something yards, but only in like 60 carries, right? Because he averaged like 9 yards a pop because he was just the triple off of the option. One thing I'm curious with, Brian, is when they were in the eye, were they running any double dive stuff as far as, fake to the fullback and then run in kind of a dive right behind, or
with the quarterback or with the running back?
No, with the running back, with the tailback.
No, I saw some duck stuff from the quarterback where they would dive him and then the quarterback would follow him right behind.
Right.
But they would use the back.
Which is still a double dive with the quarterback.
They would do it where then the eye back would kind of go in a motion to try to get the eyes of the linebackers going, basically.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, they did some of that. And I only saw it in 3-4 games. Saw it against Cincinnati. Saw it against, I think, Wofford. I'm trying to think of who the others were. But, I mean, I was talking to you like, man, I'm trying to find a couple of these games to see if they did this all the time. I watched Jacksonville State and didn't see them do it in that game. They were more traditional wing and that kind of alignment. Then I watched another game from earlier in the season where they were in shotgun a lot in that game. So like how they attack you from a look standpoint will vary depending on what they think you're going to do or what they're trying to accomplish. But the run game stuff stays true. And I love the fact that you said fullback first, because a lot of people will focus on the quarterback. The key to beating the triple option is to, number one, stop the fullback, and then number two, stop the quarterback, and to attack it. Biggest mistake that teams make, in my opinion, are teams that try to slow play the option. That's exactly what they want you to do. They
You
want
wanna
to get
attack
their
the
angles. Exactly. You need to attack it. And so we'll see if Notre Dame does that. Now, here's where we're going to see some wrinkles from Navy. And it's been talked a lot about. And, you listen to their coach say, and you're like, okay, whatever. Coaches say all types of things in camp. But then you watch them play, and especially the last couple of years, Ryan, there is definitely a different look to what they do throwing the football. Now, they don't throw the ball a ton, right? So this isn't going to be a team that comes out there and just, throws it 25 times. Last year, they averaged 17.6 attempts per game. The year before, they were at 11.6. Part of that's a little bit misleading as well. There's a couple games where they just rolled people that they didn't throw the ball a whole lot because they didn't throw it at all in the second half. I mean, so their 2011 stats are can be a little misleading in that regard, in my opinion, just because of how, a couple games where they just didn't really need to throw it a ton. But they're going to throw it a little bit more, but it's not so much the volume of pass attempts that's greater. It is greater. I think they threw about 70 more passes last year than Navy did, despite playing one less game than Navy did last season. But it's the way that they do it. I mean, they will flat out drop back and throw a quick game, and not just like banging a hitch into the boundary. I mean, they'll run snag. I've seen them run the snag concept, which is a semi-quick throw. It's not the same as they'll run out fade, fade outs. So like fades on the outside, just little quick speed outs from the inside guys.
Yep.
I've seen them do some of that stuff. And then what they'll also do, Ryan, and I don't know if you had a chance to see this because I know you watch a lot of the defense, but they'll do almost like a double option in the pass game. This is what they'll do. They'll have, and I've seen it a lot from either 3-by-1 formations, which is 3 guys to one side and 1 to the back. Or they'll do it out of their 2-by-2 where they'll bring a guy over. But what they'll do is they'll read initially the boundary throw. Is the window open? And if it is, they'll just bang a hitch. But if that's closed, the quarterback will look, he'll see it, and then he'll roll out. And they'll run some sort of flood type concept, some sort of like deep triangles, something like that, where they'll run like a go, slide outs, they'll run some wide fades. And so they'll read that. And then if he starts rolling out, he's got a completely different read on that second one. So it's a quick boundary read, and then he goes. So it looks almost like he sees it, it's close, and he's scrambling. But if you look at the pass concepts, it's actually like a double read. If that's not there, then we roll out and run some kind of longer developing concept, post-snap switches, overs from the backside. And it's really kind of interesting, honestly, to watch it. I'm curious how that's going to translate to the FBS level, because if you watch Kennesaw State, Ryan, I'm sure you'll say this, they had some athletes at Kennesaw State the last couple of years.
Xavier Shepard was the quarterback, right? Xavier Shepard, I think.
He got banged up a little bit last year, and they just weren't as good when he was out. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. But when he's healthy, they're really dynamic because he can throw it. To your point, they can throw it. And I think that's why they don't have Ty Lavatai as their starter. They have Blake Horvath. Blake Horvath's an athletic kid, but he's the better passer of the two. And I think for this offense to really roll, I think they know we can't just run triple all day, because the thing that hurts Navy, Ryan, in my opinion, is being in a conference. And what I mean by that is being in a conference means teams see you all the time. Well, the Kennesaw State staff understands that because they were in a conference. They know that a book gets written, so they have to have some different beaters to the things that people are going to do to the option. And I think attacking the perimeter with the pass game is sort of their answer. They don't do it a ton, but they do it, at least under Shepard, they did it more efficiently, because I think he was like 62, something like that % in 2021, Ryan.
Something like that.
He was sub 50 last year, or he was around 50 last year because their team wasn't as good and he was banged up. But you go back and watch some of their film from the year before, he was really efficient and he could throw the ball down the field. I mean, he's an option quarterback, right? I mean, he throws it like an option quarterback, but he runs it really well. A lot like I said, like Will Worth in 2016 with Navy. But they're going to do a lot of different stuff. They'll do 3-by-1 pass stuff where it's a pure, like, they don't do pure drop back a ton, Ryan, because the way the protection is, a lot of their pass game stuff that's more down the field is like half rolls and boots, like sprint out and bootleg type of stuff. But they will occasionally drop back, and I think they hit Cincinnati on somebody had to do it wrong. They did double wide fades, and they were right on top. It was like somebody did it wrong. And he just threw it up. Some kid made a great catch. They're going to do that. But it's going to definitely look a lot different when it comes to throwing the football. They'll run bubbles, like pre-snap read bubbles, RPO type bubbles. If the quarterback sees you, if they're they'll line up sort of like in a twins look with a wing. And if your overhang is cheating way inside, he'll literally just pull it and throw the bubble, just like an RPO. And so you'll see them do that stuff, Ryan. And I don't know that Navy has the guys that should really do damage against Notre Dame in that regard, but it takes one bad angle, one missed tackle, one you bid on something to next thing you know, they just got 30 cheap yards. And those are the dangers in the pass game. Is not that they're going to go out there and go 21 of 30 for 295 yards. It's just, do they get those 4 or 5 cheap gains of 20, 30, 40, 50 yards that, man, you're dominating the option. And then all of a sudden you have one misassignment in the pass game and you give up that big play. And that happened to Notre Dame last year, if you remember.
Yeah. It's like the biggest concern is them going 8 of 14, but those 8 go for $160, right? Like that's
exactly
like 20 yards a pop. Like you don't want to
100%
give up. The one you talked about last year, where Cam Hart got sucked up and then they just threw it over top of him, right? Like that is the difficulties with the triple sometimes, is that if I'm a linebacker or a safety like it's taken down to a second level defender, whether he has quarterback to pitch or whatever it is that you're so focused on your run fits and your run assignment that all of a sudden here's the misdirection, here's the waggle, and it's right over top of your head. Like that's the difficulty with the triple, because they kind of lull you to sleep a little bit, right? Like lull you to sleep. You're just giving up 3, 4, 7, 2, 1, 0. But they keep themselves on schedule. It's like the worst thing a triple option could ever do is to lose 2 to 3 yards in the first play. Right. And then all of a sudden in 2 plays, you're in 3rd and 11. Like that's not where you want to be, because then you're predictable. The triple option is supposed to not be predictable, which is why the passing game always averages 20 plus yards per catch. Seemingly.
Well, and you look at last year, Ryan, they were down from 18 yards per catch the year before to 15.7, which is not good for triple team. But in 2021, they were 10.8. This shows you how they kind of, again, they had a lot of injuries last year. Their yards per attempt during and I took the COVID year out because I think it's such an outlier when you only play 5 games. It's just really hard to compare. You can have one good game or one bad game that's going to skew it way more in the 5 games. So just the years they played full years, this was their yards per attempt over the years: 9.1, 9.5, 8.4, 9.7, 9.5, 10.6. Last year they dipped to 7 and 8, as I mentioned. Just had a lot of injuries. Their yards per catch: 19.1, 17.7, 16.9, 16.6, 21.4, 18. Last year they dipped to 15.7. Was a bit of an anomaly. They never averaged more than 158.9 yards per game, Ryan. But it was that, like you said, I think the number you gave is perfect, like that 8 of 14, because where Navy did it to you once last year, this offensive staff will try to do it to you 5 times. And that's the difference. Yeah. And if they can hit 3 of those passes, then all of a sudden they've done something to you. And they're going to throw the ball more against teams like that, like Notre Dame, than they would against normal FCS opponents, the way that they were. And so we'll certainly see more of that from them this year, Ryan. But I mean, that's going to be the key, is like you said, I think you nailed it, that you've got to be efficient. I think Cincinnati did a nice job against that last year. They went 7 of 15, but only had 111 yards. Kennesaw State did. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I mean, that's a good place to be. That's a good place to be. Of course, this will be a little bit bigger line and more FBS kind of guys. But man, look, Kennesaw had some dudes that can run now. I mean, like they had some dudes, in my opinion, that could come to Navy and play for them if they didn't have to go to the academy. Right? Like if it wasn't a transition from an FCS to an academy, I think you'd have seen some kids from Kennesaw come up to that level, because they had some athletic kids could play in that for Navy, not for like Notre Dame or Georgia Tech per se, but for a team like Navy. But that's going to be the key, right? Is just limit those big pass plays and dominate the trenches, which we'll get into a little bit more. And we'll do more of the keys to victory type of things here as we get into it. Ryan, I want to talk a little bit about this defense, because there's a lot of different ways you could describe this defense. They're a 3-4 by how they're listed. I think it plays a little bit more like a 3-4 alignment, 3-3-5 personnel, because one of those outside linebackers is more of a safety type, in my opinion.
Yeah. They had
Body
the John
type
Marshall
wise,
kid last year
who
that was like
was
6'2",
really
200
good.
pounds.
Had
He had
18
like
and a
10 and
half
a half
tackles
tackles
for
for loss or
loss.
something.
Oh, yeah. 18 and a half is what he had last year, right? He was a really good football
Yeah.
player.
Well, he had like 10 and a half sacks, didn't he? Or 11
Yeah.
sacks, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he was double digits, Ryan. Let me look at this real quick. He was 10 and a half. He was a very disruptive football player last year. And as you mentioned, Ryan, he was 6'2", 209. Right? I mean, so he's more Jack Kaiser than he is, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama Asa, those kind of guys, Asa guys, those kind of guys,
And
right?
he had, I believe he had 2 sacks against Notre Dame last year. Did he
Yeah.
not? He had
Yeah,
something like
I
that.
believe he
So,
did.
yeah.
Let me go look at his numbers against Notre Dame last year. He had a lot of tackles in that game, if I remember correctly. He had against Notre Dame, he had 6 tackles. He had 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. He had 4 sacks against UCF. And here's the crazy thing is they changed. If you remember, you go back and watch film, Ryan, they changed over the course of the second half of the year into a more aggressive defense. He had 2 sacks in the opener. He didn't have another sack until the Temple game on October 29th. And then in the last 5 games, he had at least 1 sack in every game, and he finished with 8.5 sacks. And we saw a similar improvement he had 3.5 tackles for loss against Delaware, didn't have another tackle for loss for the next 3 games, had 1 each against Tulsa, SMU, and Houston. And then the last 5 games, 2.5, 3, 1.5, 4, and then he had 1 against Army. So like they got a lot more aggressive. I think they needed to. They had to try and force more turnovers because their offense was just really struggling. But so we're going to see that, and we saw it. Like the Notre Dame game was sort of the epitome of it epitomized their entire season. They tried playing a little bit of their base defense early, lining up in their base looks, and Notre Dame ripped them up. Second half, they just said, F it. I mean, they just said, we're coming. And Notre Dame missed. I mean, the game gets put away in the third quarter if Notre Dame ran a wheel route to Michael Mayer. He's wide open. And if you hit him, it's a touchdown. It's ball game. It's like 42-16. It's over. And Drew Pine missed him, and then that just began a constant. Yeah. And so we're going to see how the interior of the offensive line can handle all that. But they're going to come at Notre Dame. They're going to throw a lot of different things at them. But they really start out of sort of a, I would say, a 3-4 defense with 3-3-5 personnel-ish. When you look at their starting lineup, as I mentioned before, here's their starting outside guys. So they basically have they have a Raider and a striker are their 2 outside guys, and then a Mike and a Will inside. Their Raider is the bigger guy. He's the guy that will walk up almost like they're almost sometimes, Ryan, from an alignment standpoint, they almost look kind of like Notre Dame, where that
4-man front.
Yeah, where that Raider comes up and he's 6'5", 227. Jordan Sanders, actually a pretty decent football player, but he'll come up and kind of just stand up on the edge and just be a guy that almost plays like a viper at times. So they have that guy, and then their striker is more of a that's what Marshall played last. John Marshall played last year, Ryan. That's kind of a hybrid. He'll line up like a Sam sometimes. He'll line up as like a rover sometimes. He'll come off the edge sometimes. They kind of move him all around. That guy's 5'11", 207, and his backup is 5'10", 197. That's where I say like it's the alignment wise, he plays linebacker. I mean, again, the guy that played there last year was 6'2", 209, 18.5 tackles for loss. He's not dropping a play over the top, right? They're not rolling him back in cover 2, Ryan. He is downhill. And then on the back end, they tend to play off. They tend to play soft to me. Soft, let me define that. I mean that in a football term, meaning like off, not like they're not physical. Kids from Navy aren't soft, right? Can we just –
right? But
just soft coverage. The coverage style is a little bit soft. Yes. They're willing to give up some of the quick stuff and kind of give that to you because they want to be able to bring guys from all over. Now, here's the interesting thing, Ryan, and this is where I want to kick it to you. We watched them play last year, and we saw what happened against Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame just could not get the run game going. That was not an anomaly for Navy. Navy finished, I believe, Ryan, weren't they second nationally last year in rushing yards? They finished third. Yeah. Excuse me. They finished third behind Georgia and James Madison. The next team, Marshall, was fourth, and they were about 4 yards ahead of Marshall, over 3, between 3-4 yards ahead of Marshall. And part of it is their pass defense was terrible. If you take
Yes.
away the 2 option teams they played last year, they gave up over 280 passing yards a game. However, this is the point that you made to me, Ryan, when we were discussing. You can't just look at the yards. You have to look at the yards per attempt. They ranked 6th in the nation last year in fewest yards allowed per attempt. This was a really good run defense last year that gave up 13 yards, 91 yards, 103 yards, 25 yards, 105 yards, 20 yards, 55 yards, 66 yards, 84 yards. They only gave up over 105 yards 3 times last year, Ryan. And in 2 of those games, it was against option teams, Army and Air Force, right? Houston is the only non-option team that ran for over 105 yards against them last year. So this was not an anomaly. They were just really good at it. So what I want you to kind of break down a little bit, Ryan, is what is it about Brian Newberry's defense that makes them that way? Because you could point to last year, but they only gave up 131 rushing yards in 2021 and only 4.0 yards per attempt in 2021. If you look at kind of where they were when he took his first year, 2019, when they only gave up 105 rushing yards per game and 3.2 yards per attempt. So outside of the COVID year, which for Navy was a disaster because of just how everything was going, Navy got hurt. They weren't tackling and it was just a disaster. But in the 3 non-COVID years, Ryan, since Brian Newberry's been there, they've given up 105.9, 131, and then 88.9 yards per rush. Their worst yards per attempt season was 4.0. For context, Notre Dame last year gave up about 4.0. That was one of Notre Dame's better rush defense seasons from a yards per attempt standpoint, but it was their worst last season. Or 2 seasons ago. This is an anomaly, Ryan. So I got to ask you, what is it about it? And as you'll say, it's not just, they load the box. It's not that simple, guys. It's not that simple. Because if it was just that simple, you'd gash them. You'd get those, they'd -2, +2, but then you'd have 70, right? There's a plan to it, Ryan. And that's what I want to hear from you is because you're a defensive guy. What is it that you've seen from Navy that has allowed them to be so good at slowing down and stopping the run against non-option teams under Brian Newberry?
Well, I think Newberry is kind of a master of chaos a little bit, which in the best possible way I could say that, right? Because there are some defensive coordinators that believe in chaos, right? Think about what Alex Grinch is for USC now, for instance, right? One year when he was at Washington State, it worked great because everything hit that year, right? And you were consistent. And then every other year, it's like we're getting gashed because there's no rhyme or reason to what we're asking players to do. Because, Brian, I think the great thing about this Navy defense is, yes, we can look at it and say that's a 3-4 base defense, right? You're going to have 3 down linemen. They're not the biggest lineman in the world. I think the biggest one is the Cromwell kid that's about 6'3", 292 pounds or something like that, right? They're not the biggest guys in the world.
Their other 2 starting defensive linemen, Ryan, are 256 pounds. And then their Raider, who lines up as sort of like a Viper type at sometimes, is 6'5", 227. Just wanted to give some context to what you're saying. You're absolutely correct. And then their biggest guy off the bench is 280. Their next biggest guy off the bench is 278. So just to add to your point.
No, it's perfect. I think that there's an understanding of that, right? I think the best thing that coaches can do is understand who they are and play to those strengths. Navy's coaches, Newberry included in this, knows that they are not the biggest defensive line of all time. They're not. And their linebackers also aren't the big. Their best linebacker is Ramos, who's 5'11", 205 pounds. Like, they're not big kids. But what they understand is that we have undersized kids that understand how to create leverage, and we can create chaos. How do we do that? We can call ourselves a 3-4 base, but there's times where I'm saying they have some principles that look like a 4-man front at times. They have principles where it does look like a 3-3-5, where you kind of tuck the Viper behind the line, right? Similar to how Notre Dame does it at times, right? So there are 3-3-5 moments. There's 4-2-5 moments. There's 3-4 moments. I think the best thing that they do is that they operate off of alignment versatility. They align guys in different, and it's not because there's some odd man front teams like Georgia, for instance, that they're not doing anything fancy, right? They're lining up a 0 and 2-4 techs across the board, and they're saying, we're just bigger than you, and we're just going to hold the point of attack and 2 gap. No, this Navy team is a slanting. We're going to get across your face, and we're going to bring blitzes behind us, and we're going to create chaos. What was their big adjustment last year? Started bringing pressure, and the pressure was coming from all over. But the thing is that they don't bring pressure just to bring it. They bring pressure out of necessity, but they understand what is happening around them so that they don't become gap unsound or gap disoriented. They understand what my aiming points are, and they play really well together. So there's going to be some times where even if Navy lines up in a head-up alignment across the board, they're going to be slanting away. They're going to be slanting to the strength. They're going to be creating a lot of movement up front. And the guys like Ramos and Harbor as inside linebackers, they're going to be blitzing in different spots. There's going to be double fires. There's going to be single fires. That striker that John Marshall played last year, they're going to bring him off the slot a ton. They're going to work from him in space. So I think more than anything, how you make an offensive line confused is to give them different front looks, right? There's going to be times where you're in a 4. There's going to be time you're in a 3. There's going to be times where you have 2 defensive ends in a 3-man front that are lined up in true 4s, and then you're slanting a ton. There's going to be other times where maybe one's in a 3 and one's in a 5 technique. You're just going to create different alignments, different looks to make offensive lines a little bit confused. You're going to bring pressures from all over the place, from the slot, from inside, double fires. It's movement-based is the best way that I can provide it, right? Think of, and it's not the same system because this was more of a 4-2-5 defense, but Brett Venables, when he was at his heyday in Clemson, he was incredibly aggressive from the second level. He brought pressures from everywhere, but it wasn't to the Alex Grinch level where it was just chaos getting throwing the kitchen sink of chaos at you. It was chaos out of structure, which is what I would best paraphrase what Navy does. So they're going to bring pressure from the second level. They're going to play multiple fronts. Yes, it's a 3-4 by trade and a lot of adjustments off of it, but they are going also to, at times, they're going to play a lot of cover 3 and a lot of systems where that safety is also going to get pulled up into the box. So they are going to get a numbers advantage. But more than anything, Brian, like how are they so good at stopping the run? They run off of chaos, but it's very structured chaos.
Yeah.
Different fronts, different pressures from all over the place, which cause a lot of headaches for offensive lines.
Last year, Ryan, when you talk about you just watch Marshall in the second half of that game. They were bringing him almost every play. I mean, they were just constantly bringing him because they didn't respect Notre Dame's pass game. They just said, hey, we're going to make you beat us throwing the ball. First half, Notre Dame threw the ball really well in the first half. Why? Because, again, Navy tried to play more of a straight-up type of defense early. So Notre Dame was able to get the time to throw the ball down the field. They didn't have time to do that. Even when there was guys open. I mean, the interception that they threw, Matt Salerno's open on a quick out cut on third down. Just catch it, throw it, get it out there. But, pressure gets in Drew Pine's face. He holds a little bit long, gets batted in the air, pick it off. Navy goes down and scores a touchdown on the very next play. So when you watch what they did, they said, hey, we're going to mix up our looks. I thought they did a great job of confusing Drew Pine. And even some of the throws he did make, they had a big 3rd and 15 to Deion Colsey. Navy backed off. And Pine went, boom, 15-yard, first down. They just realized, look, if we give them time, they're going to pick us apart because we just don't have the athletes. You remember like back in 15 and 16 when Navy had like that secondary that had like about 3 or 4 kids that were like legit Power 5 caliber athletes on the back end of the defense, had one of the better corner tandems Navy's ever had. And they could athletically kind of run with you a little bit back then. They don't have that now.
Jordan Riley, I think, was one of them, right?
Yeah.
I think he spent a little bit of time in the NFL. So, yeah that was a good team.
That defense was really good. Really good back then. I'm trying to remember a couple of those other kids' names. Brendan Clements, he had 4 interceptions back, and he was a really good player back then. Josiah Powell was a really rangy outside linebacker. Tyrus Wooten. They had some really good players. Sean Williams was a good player for them back then too. They don't have that kind of athleticism on the back end, in my opinion, this year, and I think they know that, and that's why I expect us to see kind of a little bit of a more aggressive approach. But Notre Dame's going to have to find ways to get the run game going, Ryan. And I'm going to be fine. We'll talk about this a little bit as we get into the week about things Notre Dame can do to get there, but they're going to have to be able to run the football. They can't just throw it. But I think you also don't need to pound your head against a wall trying to run against a brick wall where they're outnumbering you if you can just rip them up. Hey, do that to open up the run game.
Yep.
I think that's going to be an interesting look at it. But as you said, this is who he is. And what happens when teams do what Navy did to Notre Dame last year, Ryan, and it's an adjustment because we know we can't stop Notre Dame. So we have to put in this defense. It might last for a while, but once Notre Dame gets your couple reads, they're going to figure it out because it's not who you are. This is who Brian Newberry is, to your point. And you can't have organized chaos in a game against Notre Dame because they're better than you, and you know you have to bring that.
Right.
There's a lot of people that have tried to emulate Clemson game plans against opponents they share in common, and it doesn't work because A, they didn't have Clemson's players, and B, there was a method to Brent Venables' madness, at least as a defensive coordinator. I don't know what it is as a head coach. But
I was going to say, as quirky and annoying Brent Venables is as a head coach, he's a great defensive mind. Like, there's never been a question about that.
You watch his defense and John Tenuta's, and you may think, oh, those are similar. But no, there was a method to his madness where John Tenuta was just there. It was a very unsound defense. When you watch Brian Newberry game after game after game, you're waiting on him to be like, okay, winner team's going to figure it out, and they don't.
Right.
Because that's just it's who they are. They have, and the point being, they have answers for stuff. They don't just line up and show these things, you know. And last year, they were triggering guys from all three levels in the second half last year, Ryan. I mean, they got really aggressive, and they basically said, we don't think you can protect the quarterback long enough to beat us. I'm very curious how that's going to be with this year with Notre Dame having an RPO-based system, and then also having a guy like Sam Hartman, who people can talk about, well, he's only 6'1". He's still 2 inches taller than the quarterback they had last year in this matchup. And he's got a little bit more of a higher release than Drew did. So you're even curious how that, because there was a couple batted balls last year on guys were open and just batted balls. But that's another thing that shows me that this is a team that's well coached. When they had those pressures and Notre Dame tried to get rid of the ball quick, you saw like six dudes immediately like throw their hands up at once to try. That's that organized chaos you talk about, right? It's a structured chaos is the way I like to say it, you know? And I love what you said, master of chaos. That is a great way of putting it, because he knows how to use that chaos to his advantage, but also not make themselves vulnerable to the things that you often see from coordinators like that. And I always get, these guys that spend their whole careers at the lower levels are always really interesting, right? Because one of two things is going to be true. A, they were just that guy. They just weren't necessarily good enough to be that. But the other one is these guys are really wicked smart football guys. And being at that lower level made them even better because they didn't go out and recruit the 5 stars. They couldn't go out and get the best players. I mean, maybe North Dakota State could, but like when you're at Kennesaw and you're at North, I think he was like North Alabama one year. And when you look at his resume, he wasn't at North Dakota State. He wasn't at that kind of program. You've got to really make sure that you are on your P's and Q's as a defensive coordinator, because I don't have the Jimmies and the Joes like I would have if I was at Georgia or Notre Dame or teams like that. And those guys tend to be really smart, really smart. And that's what I think we see from Brian Newberry is the guy that, man, that translates, because he knows it may look like he's just bringing 7 dudes, but then you watch the safeties at the moment the linebackers trigger, the safeties are immediately triggering down to protect in case there's a miss, because when you blitz like that, if the running back gets through, there's not a lot there, right? But the way that they would trigger, the timing of it was really impressive. I mean, as soon as Marshall would come flying down, the safety comes hard down to replace him. And everybody does that. Everybody rolls it. But the timing in which they did it, the technique, the angles they played at, like, man, this is a really well-coached football team. And you can see it on film as well.
Yeah, and they play hard. I mean, there's the traditional stuff of like, I don't want to be too cliche with this, but the guys that aren't incredibly talented usually make up for those lacks of talent with their work ethic, right? And I think that is evident on, I mean, I don't know, Brian, like every Navy game that I saw from last year defensively, team plays hard, man. Like they just get to their spots, they get where they're supposed to be, and they play with an absolute reckless abandon and high motor. So I think that you can't undersell that this Navy team is well coached from a technical perspective, and they play really hard. You're going to have to earn what you get, right? Even with a bit like a Navy team that was bad last year, 4-8, they still had a good defense for the most part, because you look at it and say, they make you work for it, man. Like it's not like nothing's easy. Like it's not easily given. You saw Notre Dame score, what was it, 32 points in the first half last year or whatever it was, and then not score another point the rest of the game. 35. And then you have to scrounge to hold off 35-32 in the end, because the second half they were like, we're not stopping here. Like, Notre Dame took the foot off the gas a little bit and didn't have answers to some of the adjustments. And while Navy's like, here we come, like, we're going to play harder than we did in the first half. So that effort might be a little bit cliche, but I don't think we can undersell it. The Navy team is not going to give up. They're going to play hard from snap 1 to snap 100. That's just where we're at.
Yeah. So that's kind of who Navy is, Ryan. I mean, that's what this football team is going to be. We're going to dive into a little bit more of that, I hope, as far as how to defend it. We'll see. We have a couple special fun things planned for you here this week. But look, this is a great opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and just kind of prove to yourselves who you are. I mean, that's the biggest thing about the opening weekend, Ryan. It's about proving something to yourself.
Right.
You know, I don't know that Notre Dame's going to prove a ton. They're a 20.5 point favorite. So if they win by 19, that's considered not being as impressive as it should have been. If you win by 40, it's like, who cares? It's Navy. You've beat them that bad plenty of times.
Right.
I mean, Notre Dame a couple years ago, Ryan, what was it, like 49-14 or something like that against Navy in 2019? Notre Dame beat them, let's see, what was that score? 52-20. That was a ranked Navy team that went 11-2. Nobody cares, right? It's Navy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but it's more about proving something. I mean, yeah, it's a boy. Watch Notre Dame. And Notre Dame was impressive. Now let's see what they do in 2 weeks when they go to NC State. Right? That'll be the justifiable response to a convincing Notre Dame victory. It's more about, you've got something to prove to yourselves. This is what you've put all the work in for. Is everything that we've said to you and everything that you've said about yourselves. Are you that team? This is your chance to go prove it. And the interesting dynamic to this too, Ryan, is what is Marcus Freeman's plan for this game is a lot different than what they did in 2012. He mentioned last night after the game in 2012, they flew back immediately. And, you know, they were obviously a little rusty that next game against Purdue. He said this year they're actually staying overnight. And honestly, I got to be real about this, Ryan. This is one of those reasons why, and I don't like the fact that they're playing an FCS team, but this is one of those years where if you're going to do it, this is the perfect timing to do it, because you're coming back from this being in Ireland. You could play bad the next week and still win by 30 against Tennessee State, if we're being honest about it, right?
Yes.
But they're going to be out there longer, get settled in. You know, I think they're flying out tomorrow, I believe. So they're going to have at least 2 days of practice out there. Then there's no rush to play the game, get dressed, and let's fly back and have an overnighter and a red eye and all that other kind of stuff. They're going to stay out there for an extra day, fly back on Sunday, and then get back at it on Monday as they get ready for Tennessee State. So I don't know if it's the right plan or not, Ryan. I've never coached a game overseas. I have no clue if it's the right plan or not. But I think it makes sense why they're doing it. And having Tennessee State the next week, I think, helps make some of those decisions. You may, if you got Ohio State coming up next week, we need to get back to work. Let's get home and get back to work, right? But when you're playing Tennessee State, I think it gives you that privilege. And that's no disrespect to Tennessee State, but it just gives you that ability to say, hey, look, let's take our time. Let's be patient. Let's get out. Let's go out there. It's a business trip. We got something to accomplish, something to show, and then we'll get back home afterwards. And it sounds like that's their plan. So it's going to be a fun weekend, man.
Don't kiss the Blarney Stone. That's rule number one.
It's going to be a fun weekend, man. I'm looking forward to seeing what this team is going to do, and of course, we'll be there afterwards for the post game show to talk all about it on Saturday as well. I forgot to mention that we do a post game show as well. So we're going to go to a mailbag next, Ryan. But before we do, I just want to thank everybody for being with us today. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast platform, we would love a 5-star review. And if you have not done so already, folks, sign up for the message board. You are missing out. Going to have some stuff coming up this week that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot more stuff that's going to be film related on the board, kind of post game, and then some pregame stuff on some of the bigger opponents. But I'm going to have a couple things this week on the message board only, breakdowns of Navy and some of the stuff they did at Kennesaw State that we're going to dive into this week as well. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Thanks for joining us for the first part of today's Irish Breakdown podcast. We'll have a mailbag coming up next. So we don't have a lot of questions today, but we got some good ones, I think. And so let's dive right into it, Mr. Roberts, and start off here with a super chat from Lucky Ducks 512. Appreciate you for that. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much. And the Response is love IB. Think you guys give the most reasonable and accurate info. Based on camp, do you think this team will have the killer instinct to really put teams away and show they are elite, or is it still too early to tell?
I mean, for me, Ryan, I don't care what they showed in practice. I mean,
Yep.
that's great and it's good. And I'm excited. Part of my excitement about this team is what I've seen in practice.
Yep.
But until you do it on a Saturday, it really doesn't mean a whole lot, honestly. And so, am I optimistic that they'll have that kind of mentality? Sure. But doing that in practice and doing that in a 60-minute football game is quite different. So I'm
100%.
hopeful. I'll just say that I'm hopeful they'll have that. But really, that comes down to more who, to me, that's more of a Marcus Freeman thing, though. At the end of the day, is you guys could come out like last year against Navy. They came out trying to bury Navy last year.
Yeah, they did.
And then just lost their focus in the second half. And that's partly coaching. I mean, that's partly, hey, are we coming out the second half and doing the stuff we've been doing? Are we going to have the same mentality? We're trying to put this team away, and those are the different things that you'll learn about the coaching staff as well, not just the football team. But I'm optimistic about it, Ryan. But I'm just a believer when it comes to things like that. That's not something you can work on building your character in practice, but you don't really know who you are until you see it on a Saturday. And so that's why I'm going to wait and see approach. But I'm more optimistic they're going to be that team this year than I probably was this time a year ago.
Two things I'm very hopeful for. One is that they have the killer instinct to the question. The other one is that they play with more swagger and a little bit more flair. Like I want those two things to exist. Based upon what you have told me in practice and the recaps you have, sounds like it's trending in that direction.
Right.
But to your point, man, I have been on some teams that were actually terrible practice teams, but just turned it on in games. That were great practice teams, but didn't turn it on as much in games, and a little bit of mixture there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the actual, what can we actually know about this team right now? We know what they're being taught on a day-to-day basis, and we know what they're showing us in practice. But
in their athletic ability and stuff like that, right?
But until it's translated to a game, you just don't really know, because when the lights shine, some things change, right? And things change for the better, things change for the worse sometimes. Like it's just very hard to predict what it like we have questions, of course, as we always do, and it's a good question of freshmen making an impact on Notre Dame.
Right.
And I'll say it like this: there are some freshmen that shine bright in practice, but then the lights turn on and you're just like, you might be a year away, sir. Like you might not quite be ready for that smoke right now. So let's wait and see what they look like for game one, because I think you will get a pretty good glimpse of what they can be in game one, even if you don't get the full scope.
I mean, because Ryan, look, at the end of the day, there's part of the difference between practice and a game is there's less on the line at practice. If you make a mistake, if I line up and we're playing a triple option and I come out there and we play it great and we blow it up, that's great. You move on to the next play. But then, man, we hit two guys, hit the wrong gap, and they rip off a big play. Hey, run that again, fellas. Run that again.
Yeah.
There's no run it again in games, man.
No,
you make that mistake and it's 6-0, right? I mean, that's the reality of there's that. So that's where the pressure's just ramped up. The focus has got to be so much greater. And that's one of those many differences between games and practices. There's just so much less room for error. And, you take some chances maybe you wouldn't take in practice because the consequences aren't as great. I've made this point before. Like we'd seen Ian Book in practice just looking like $1 million, and I've said to people, Ryan, I know I've said this to you. If Ian Book would have played on Saturdays like he saw again in a lot of the games practices that we saw in certain periods, you'd be like, man, this guy's going to be a star. And then you get out to the game and it's check down, hold it, scramble, check down, don't throw it down the field, and it just was a different guy because once the consequences are greater, he just was unwilling to do it. And then other guys are, I don't care. I'm going to go out there and sling it. This is who I am. Why do you practice that way? Because this is who I am. That's why I play that way on Saturday. Yeah. But you'll never really know until you get to Saturday, man. You really never know.
Without question. Our next question was from Marcus Freeman's Little Leprechaun Boy. Okay, Ben.
Love it.
Mailbag. I was watching an interview with Ryan Day, and he was asked, what is one thing he could change about college football if he could do so? He said he'd make the hash marks like they are in the NFL. Thoughts?
Of all the crap that needs to get fixed in college football, that's what your attention is?
I've heard a lot of people defer to this too, because I honestly, like, it's no shot against Ryan Day, but I feel like a lot of coaches, it's just like, I don't want to ruffle any feathers, so I'm going to say like the most like
right.
who cares
But
topic
it's
of all
just like,
time.
dude, this also to me shows a lot of what's the issue with Ryan Day. And until he fixes this, because what's the whole purpose of this, Ryan? What's the purpose of having smaller hash marks or more narrow hash marks, more space for your passing game to work?
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And, because if you're on the far hash in college, there's some throws that you just, some plays you can't call. When you're on the far hash in the NFL, everything's on the table. And not just because you have NFL arms, it's because you have a far hash throw is not nearly as far in the NFL as it is in college. I mean, that's what it is. It's about, I want to be able to have more room to throw the football. It just, it's not something that, 2012 Nick Saban would have given a rip about, because he's like, well, we just got this room in here and we're just killing you in here. So what do we need to worry about all that stuff for? We won a championship with Marquise Mays as our leading receiver. You know what I mean? So I just, if there was one thing that you could say you can only make one change, only one change. I said this before. I would make it to where there was one, like any TV deals that were signed went to one entity, and that entity would take out just whatever it costs for them to just do their business, and then every other dollar split evenly amongst all the Power 5 teams. And that way we don't have to care as much about all this other nonsense and bull crap that's happening with it. If it was something more related to the game, I'd have to think about that one more, Ryan. I kind of like the game the way that it is, to be completely honest with you.
They asked Yurcevich from Penn State. I'm sure I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the offense coordinator. They asked him a similar question, and his response was he would like when a player has an injury timeout on the field, because obviously he's an offensive guy, so his mind's thinking they're trying to slow the game down, that player has to sit out the entire series instead of one play, which I thought was kind of interesting, because it would cut down on people faking injuries potentially if it's true. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that. I wouldn't make it a whole series. I'd maybe make it like three plays, something like that.
Yeah,
3 plays or the end of the series. So if the series ends in a play, he doesn't have to sit out the first 2 plays of the next series, right? Just the series is over. It also negates. I like that. I thought
it was interesting. It was one that I hadn't heard before, but I'm like, that would cut down on people faking injuries.
Because if a guy's injured, he's not coming back in 3 plays anyway.
Exactly. Well, his thought was also, because obviously I know why he's saying that, because he's an offensive guy. He doesn't want to ruin the flow of a drive. But also, to his point, it's like, if a guy is legitimately injured, shouldn't they be having legitimate medical attention on the sideline? So how are they coming back in 3 plays? And I'm like, that's
correct.
Fair point.
Exactly right. If a guy is genuinely injured, I mean, sometimes you can get like a little, hey, I just got a little bit of a stinger, but I can come back in a play or two. But a guy that's laying on the ground, that needs medical attention, he doesn't miraculously get healthy in the next play. You are 100% correct. That's what I tried to, when people were talking about Sean Crawford a couple years ago, when he went out of a game, I'm like, the dude didn't come back for several plays. I mean, he was genuinely cramping up. So it was against Georgia, actually, now that I think about it, in 2019. I'm like, no, that dude was legitimately cramping up. Like, that's why his teammates made him go down, is because he was cramping up. But anyway, I just think of all the things that, change the transfer rule. Bring, the million change the transfer rule. Stop using NIL as an enticement. I mean, just all the different things you'd want to change about the game. And, that's what you want to change.
Okay. I assumed the question was probably specific to gameplay, but I mean, regardless, it's still kind of not, it's still kind of lame, but
that's still not in my top 5. If you're just talking about gameplay, still not top 5. I like the guy from Penn State. I do like that one. I kind of think that one makes sense. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Here's something I would do. Offensive personal fouls are no longer 15 yards. I think that is pass interference penalties. I would change isn't it still 15 yards for the offense if you get an offensive pass? That to me is too steep of a penalty, in my opinion. Here's another one. I would be a little bit more strict about holding penalties on offense. I think they allow way too much holding to go on in today's game in college football, in the trenches, way too much. That's something gameplay wise that I would It's kind of like in basketball, Ryan. My dad's been on this forever. He talked about, letting him play in the last 2 minutes. He's like, why? A foul is a foul. If you impact a guy's arm when he's shooting, it's not letting him play. That impacts the shot, right? That should be a foul.
Right.
And so, like, for me, like, where I wouldn't be, like, they'll call some like these really cheap holding penalties, but when I'm coming around you and my shoulder gets turned because you're holding me, how many times did we see this last year? That's clearly impacting the play. Now, if you and I are kind of blocking and I'm keeping you face to face and I'm holding the crap out of you, you just need to do a better job. But if you're getting past me and I'm holding on and my arms are getting extended or I'm yanking, that should be a penalty. And we see that not get called all the time in college football. And I would like to see more of that. I would like to see holding from the offense be a greater part of. Now, if you want to say, well, it's just too detrimental of a penalty, fine. Make it more strict. Make it a 5-yard penalty, right? Like, defensive holding is what, 5 yards, automatic first down, correct?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Make it a 5-yard penalty. But be stricter, be more strict about it. Okay, happy medium. But they've got to call holding more in college football. Has to be done.
Next question was from David Lowe, who says, over under Sam Hartman touchdowns Saturday at 3.5. Over. Give me the over.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm certainly hopeful that it's going to be the over.
Yeah.
If Notre Dame dominates Navy, then it'll be over because, Ryan, they're going to hit some big plays. He's going to hit Chris Tyree on an over, and he just outruns the defense for a 60-yard touchdown. It's going to be a go route to Tobias Merriweather for a 35-yard touchdown, right? It's going to be stuff like that. I don't think they're not going to dominate Navy running for 300 yards. I just and 6 rushing. I just don't see that. Number one, because I just don't think Navy's going to let them do that. Even if Navy wasn't really good run defense, they're going to load the box and make Tobias. Why in the world would you say, hey, we're gonna let Joe Walton, Blake Fisher, and Aldrich Estime eat today? Why would you do that? I don't care who the quarterback is. Yeah, I think their quarterback's really good, but I know nothing about Tobias Merriweather and Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse and all these other guys playing receiver. Now, Jaden Thomas ate them up pretty good last year, but guess what? What did he do in the second half? Nothing. Because we outloaded him in the trenches. We outnumbered them in the trenches, and they couldn't get throws off. So they're going to do that again. So if Notre Dame's going to really dominate this game, like, the only way that they cover the spread and he doesn't do that is if it's 21-0. I mean, that's the only way that they do it. If they're going to dominate this game, it's going to have to come because they had some big plays in the pass game, in my opinion.
And it's also, David just says touchdowns, so he didn't also disclose whether he's talking about passing touchdowns, total touchdowns, and very well could be a 3 or 4 touchdown pass day with 1 rushing touchdown as well. I mean, we literally saw that in the Blue Gold game where he had a scramble for a touchdown. And quietly, everyone talks about the 110 touchdown passes he's thrown in his career. Sam Hartman also has 17 rushing touchdowns in his career too. Like, he's scored a few touchdowns rushing.
He had 11 in 2021 alone.
Yeah.
And he had 50 touchdowns in 2021.
Wild.
So, yeah, he's pretty good.
Beefeater ND08. What's up, Beefeater? Says, do you start our young wide receivers with some easy plays to build confidence, or you just go nuts and pump up Hartman's stats?
I mean, you do what you need to do to move the football early.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, part of the reason, Ryan, I would probably go with some more shorter stuff early is strategic, not about the young players, but just if they're going to come at tight inside, then we're just going to get the ball out to the perimeter early. We're going to try to force them to, I'm going to run a screen early. Now they may sniff it out or they may, beat my corner but I'm still stretching the field widthwise in this particular game. And then I'll take some shots. But look, if I think first play the game, if I've instructed Sam Hartman in practice, listen, when we're in the boundary, and they're going to give us a cover 1 look to the field, and we know that safety can't get over, and it's a one-on-one to the bias. Take that shot, and they show that look first play of the game. Take the shot. So when I say I'd probably do things a little bit, maybe some quick games, some hitches, some outs, some snags, some slides, some bubbles, some nows early, it's more strategic than it is necessarily trying to get them going. I mean. Right. I don't think that's and plus there's only one young guy at receiver that's going to be starting the game, and that's Tobias. Jaden had his best game of his career against Navy last year. Chris Tyree's, Notre Dame's leading receiver in yards and catches and for the career at the group. He's a senior. Now, of course, the young Jaden Greathouse and Rico are part of what he's talking about too. But those are guys that are more, you're getting them into the flow of the game, series 2 and series 3. You're not coming out there series 1 in that regard.
Right.
So that's part of it as well. But I also think the nature of the position Jaden Greathouse plays, as we saw in the spring game, is naturally going to be him getting options and outs and things along those lines. It's just part of what that position does more than some others.
I think it's also part of what players we're talking about trying to get going, right? Beefeater is like Chris Tyree, maybe getting him a screen quick early in the game might be a really good idea, because we have to remember this is his first game as a true wide receiver. So like, it's awesome that we're hearing him catching seam routes and balls down the field, but like, let's ease him into the flow of the game a little bit, right? Jaden Greathouse, I'm not worried about easing him into the flow. Let's just let him find his spots in the secondary and let him go. If Braylon James is coming in the game, maybe I do take a shot downfield just to let him get acclimated, because that's what Braylon James right now does really well. Maybe just let him run some hitches or a comeback or something deep, deep down the field, and let him try to make a play. So I think all those things matter dependent on what player we're talking about, right? A wide receiver like Chris Tyree, who's playing his first ever game at wide receiver in a live setting, I might want to just get him a touch early on. A Braylon James, I might want to just get him a touch early on because he's still maturing. A Jaden Greathouse, I think you could just run the playbook with Jaden Greathouse. Like, that's what I think about that kid. Like, I can run my RPO stuff. I can run my spot stuff. He can run his option stuff. Like, he's ready to go, because every single day you work with him that he's just a natural at it. So very dependent on who those players are, in my opinion.
Agree.
Next question was from Pete Weber. What's up, Pete? Who are the 3 biggest personalities so far throughout fall camp that have been pushing the team on the practice field, and what is their style? Well, I like this question.
Well, we've only seen a certain number of practices, so I can only speak to what we have seen. I've mentioned this before. Zeke Correll is the guy on offense I hear the most and see the most. He's the guy that's been the most vocal and active when it comes to the offense, and then obviously Sam Hartman's a part of that. But I don't see a lot of guys on offense that are necessarily really vocal guys the same way you see on defense. Defensively, it's been a few guys. Obviously, J.D. Bertrand's always talking and getting people lined up and communicating. We see Jason. I mean, honestly, Jason Onye is probably the most vocal guy they have on defense. I mean, he's just always kind of trying to get 5 guys fired up, trying to pick fights. Like, and I mean that kind of funny, in a funny manner, not a real manner, but like, he'll be yelling at Blake Fisher when he's not even on the field. It's kind of like, why are you ticking this guy off? You're not the one that got to go against him right now. You know what I mean? But it's all in fun. But, Jason's a guy that provides a lot of that emotional energy, I think, on the defense. And Riley Mills feeds off Jason more so than Riley Mills sets that tone. Riley just kind of goes and plays. And then, like, once the other D lineman starts yapping, then you can kind of see, like, Riley getting into it. And, like, he'll start doing some stuff. And he's one of that guy. On the back end, Cam Hart a little bit, but I think Xavier Watts is probably the most, active guy back there for me. Jack Kaiser's another guy that's a really good leader in that regard too. But it's primarily the captain type of players. I mean, they're captains for a reason.
Jaden Mickey's my favorite guy, Brian, because I played with a wide receiver when I was in high school that he was like the same way. Like, he would talk to everyone, right? But like, he would also talk and make opposing offensive linemen angry when he's playing corner and I'm the linebacker. I'm like, dude, I got this. We're okay. Go talk to a wide receiver over there. Like, that's not your battle, sir. So,
one of my favorite Dominique Wilkins stories is some guys chirping at Larry Bird, and Dominique's like, dude, shut up. You don't have to guard him. You know what I mean? Now, another one was Bird. Kevin McHale tells the story. Larry Bird would start. He would talk to a guy that Kevin McHale was going against, like some great player. And before the game started, be like, Kevin, why don't you tell him what you told me in the locker room? Kevin's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He was like, say some insult. Kevin's like, I never said that. He's just trying to get somebody going. But yeah, I mean, that's how Jaden is, man. He's just, you could beat him for a 40-yard touchdown and he's going to talk trash about how you didn't enter the end zone appropriately. I mean, he's that, and that's just who he is. And that's the other thing is you kind of got to be yourself in that regard. you know, and that's who Jaden is. Benjamin's always going to be the quiet kid that just locks people down and just does his job. And Jaden's the guy that's going to then tell you, like, Jaden Mickey will talk more trash about plays that Benjamin Morrison makes, meaning like he'll talk trash to the other team when Benjamin Morrison makes a play than Benjamin Morrison will do when Benjamin Morrison makes a play.
Right.
It doesn't mean that Benjamin doesn't celebrate. I mean, he does. We saw that, last year, but it's just like Jaden is just, guys, if you could be at practice, it's just nonstop. Just him and Jason Onye, the whole practice, just chirp. And, like, Ryan, that's some of that swag. But then they'll go out there and they'll be physical and they'll back it up. And that's the thing, is like, it's one thing to talk trash. Because Jason Onye, he'll be talking trash from the bench, but when he goes out there and it's his turn to play, he gets after it. So that's kind of where you see some of that. Now we can just hope it can translate into what we see on Saturday.
You need those guys, man. You need those guys.
You do.
Robert Matichek, got that name again. I'm so good. Saw Coach Freeman explain how Notre Dame's 18 end zone hashes at a 42-degree angle represents Notre Dame's founding and point to the dome. Do you have any favorite Notre Dame tradition symbols? Thank you very much. Easy one for me, Brian, to get mine out of the way. I love the lighting of the candle at the grotto, especially at a night game, because then when you walk out, you see all the illuminating lights. It's really nice and pretty and beautiful, and a great meaning, obviously, behind it. So that's mine.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I necessarily have any favorite traditions and symbols. I just think whenever I'm on campus, I just sit here and think, man, this is such a beautiful place. The library with the picture of Touchdown Jesus with the Golden Dome. They say it's going to be, they say that the Golden Dome is going to be back to, it's got a bunch of scaffolding and stuff around it now. They're doing some repairs on it. They say it's going to be good to go by the time the season starts. We'll see. But, the thing is, that's weird for me, Ryan, is I've only ever been to a Notre Dame game twice where I wasn't there for work.
Sure.
So it just kind of gets to the point where it's like, when you're there, it's beautiful. I love it. I admire it, but I'm there to work. So I wouldn't necessarily have any necessary traditions. But the scene from the press box is great, because you look to your right and you just see everything. And it's because it's such a higher press box now, where the old press box was kind of facing out towards the road. So you had to look left and you could see Touchdown Jesus, but you couldn't really see the rest of campus. Now you sit in the press box and you can see all the campus, and it's just gorgeous, man. So it's maybe more of a tradition for me to just kind of look at that and take it all in. But I think the thing I think is the coolest, though, I think the player walk's probably the thing I like the most. That's really awesome. Cool. I like that. Hitting the sign on the way out, two signs really, because everybody knows about the Touchdown Jesus, play like a champion today. But then there's also the one, as soon as you walk out, the white sign that they all hit as well. So those would probably be mine. But honestly, the field, the end zone one is actually one I'd like to see them get rid of. I'd like to see them actually put like Notre Dame or Irish or something like that in the end zone. I'd like to see colored end zones. I think that would add a lot more pizzazz to the field. So that's just my stance. I know I'm not.
Player walk is really dope, though. To your point, like that's one where I always get to the player walk every time I'm there, because it's just an awesome scene for all the fans and everything.
Because that's one of the two. That's about the only time that you see the two great aspects of Notre Dame come together: the team and the fan base.
Yes. Yep.
It's about the only time they really kind of come together. Because like when they do the alma mater, they're not singing to the fans; they're singing to the student section. Right. Which is fine. That's awesome. That's great. I love that tradition. Win or lose, you're singing the alma mater, right? Playing the fight song after touchdowns, not after extra points. Excuse me, because they don't play it actually after touchdowns. They play it after the extra point. They play the other thing after touchdowns. I forget the name of that song, but and then they play the fight song after the extra point. I believe it's still that way.
Yep.
But yeah, those are all cool parts of it.
Absolutely. Coach Koch, in the last two fall camps, how would you rank the quarterbacks?
I mean, look, with all due respect, y'all know that I think if Tyler Buchner would have stayed at Notre Dame and got time to develop, I think he could have been a good quarterback. But where he was last year and where Sam Hartman is just light years ahead. I mean, it's just the other thing too, Ryan, and this is just – kind of some of the film I saw from last year, just the physical talent of the quarterback room is so much better this year from a throwing standpoint. Basically Sam Hartman replaces Tyler Buchner, no brainer. He's a better thrower, way better thrower than Tyler was. Steve Angeli is a better version of himself right? So that's an improvement.
Yes.
And then Kenny
Yes.
Minchie has so much more arm talent than Drew Pine. Now, he's not as experienced and all that, but he's much bigger and he has much more natural arm talent than Drew Pine has. So just from a pure
much
God,
bigger.
yeah. And that's no knock on Drew. I'm not trying to be critical of Drew. It's just the reality of it. But you know, it's.
I mean, Drew Pine was 5'11", 190 pounds. Kenny Minchie is almost he's like 6'1" and a half, 220
He's almost
pounds.
6'2",
right?
exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We had another question from Coach Koch, excuse me, who says opinions seem varied, with some being high on Steve Angeli and others not so much. Why do the opinions seem to be so diverse?
I can't tell you that. You, in order for me to answer this question, Coach, and I mean no disrespect here, I'd have to get into the minds of other people. Number one, number two, even if I knew their opinions, you know, I mean, in order to have an opinion on this, I'd have to know their opinions. I don't read other people's stuff. I mean, I get vague comments about so and so said such and such about this guy, and this guy raved about him. But I'm like, I've heard people say things that I've said, and I'm like, yeah, that's not at all like what I said or even the spirit of what I said. So I don't just assume that what people tell me is exactly what other people said. So I couldn't tell you what other people say. I mean, it's also, it could be your perspective. Oh man, Steve Angeli played great today for a backup quarterback. And you're not meaning that disrespectfully, but you're the standard's different for him than what it is for Sam Hartman. Maybe that's it. I have no clue, honestly. I really don't. I don't have any idea, nor do I want to really share some of the reasons why I think people have difference of opinions. But there's also some people who just don't know what they're looking at, to be honest with you.
Right.
So,
Yep.
but some people can genuinely, who know the game, can genuinely. Ryan and I don't always agree on players. If I didn't think Ryan didn't know football, I wouldn't have hired him. I mean,
Right.
so I know he knows football, but reasonable minds can disagree on things as well. And just hey, I put more value on this part of a player, and Ryan puts more value on that part of a player, and we just come to a different opinion on things. So, I mean, that could be it too. But to answer your question directly, Coach, I'd have to know what other people said, and I don't, nor do I care. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just like I've said this before. Why don't I read other people's stuff? Because I don't want to be thinking about what somebody else said when I'm writing something. Because what if I'm like, man, I would have written that, but so-and-so wrote that. And I don't want to seem like, so I'm going to write what I write. And that's no one else's opinion is really going to impact what I think. And so I don't have enough time in the day to do my own work, much less read what other people say about things. So that's the other part of it too. But I can't answer that. I don't know, Ryan, do you read what other people write about the team at all?
No, not really. No, I just, it's weird though. Cause I think that when people are watching the same thing, it's okay if there's a difference of opinion, but it shouldn't be like one far right and one far left. You know what I mean? Like
well, like you mean like what we saw with
that,
CJ Carr at the Elite 11? I mean,
exactly. It's like some people thought he looked great, some people thought he looked bad. It's just like,
well,
how
one person thought he didn't look bad.
Weird.
One person,
sure,
right? One person at on three didn't think he looked very good. Yes. But that's the other thing too is you sometimes, Ryan, you could have a bias built into it, where if you think a guy's something and you want him to be something, and then when he shows you a flash of it, you're like, oh, that's that guy. He just did, Or if you think lowly of a guy, sometimes and I try to eliminate that and it's easy to do because like if Steve Angeli proves me wrong, great, it's awesome, it's good for Notre Dame.
Yep.
So I have no problem evaluating that way. I don't hold to my opinions of what I thought of kids as high school and then evaluate kids in that vacuum. It's evaluating a guy based on, can you help Notre Dame win a championship? That's it. And I don't care if I thought you were a good recruit or not. That's what it comes down to for me.
Yep. We had another question from Coach Koch. A lot of good questions today, sir. What are some indicators throughout the year that would point to a player leaning towards transferring? Are there any high-profile players that you are expecting to hop in the portal this year?
Whether Notre Dame or other schools, I have no idea. I don't really, because there's nothing I can do to control it, so I don't really spend a whole lot of time on it. We'll have to see how the season plays out. I mean, nobody's jumping in right now that I know of. I don't think that Kyle McCord's going to go out there and transfer if he gets beat out, or Devin Brown's going to transfer right now if he gets beat out, or Ty Simpson's going to transfer right now if he gets beat out. I mean, maybe they do, but I can't know that if they're going to do that. So I honestly don't know what that's going to look like. key indicators are if you're at games a lot, it's body language. If you see a guy that's let's just say hypothetically, and I'll use him as an example because I love the kid and I know he will be the exact opposite of this. But let's just say Drake Bowen's not on any special teams. He's not playing at linebacker. And during the game, he's standing all the way on the far side of this field. He's not near the defense. When the defense comes together as a huddle, he just kind of stands off and does his own thing. Or he's at the back of the huddle, just kind of not paying attention. Like, that's the body language of a guy that's not invested. And those guys are always risks to transfer. The guys that are going to be that dude is, I look down there, Drake Bowen hasn't played a snap in 3 games, but every time the defense is there, he is there locked into what the defensive coordinator is saying. And he is listening to J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser talk, and he is right there paying attention, and he's cheering and all that. That's a dude that's locked in. He knows his time will come. Does that mean he's happy about not playing? Of course not. I don't ever want a great player with talent to be happy not playing, right? But that's when you see that investment, you see that buy-in that, hey, yeah, I'm not playing, but I got something to learn, and I'm going to be ready when my time is called. That's usually a kid that's going to stay and not leave the first sign of adversity. The kid that's over there pouting on the end and not being really around his team, that's a guy that I'm worried about. How bought in is he really to the team? And that's a guy that I would be worried about leaving, honestly. But that's just and I say that about Drake Bowen because, Ryan, you and I both know Drake Bowen well enough to know that's not how he would act. And so that's why I use him as an example, because I think we know how he'll be in games.
Isolation is like a big thing, right? I mean, to your point, body language is a part of that, like isolating themselves away from the team a little bit because they've kind of checked out. You know what I mean? Like and then also I think an indicator too, Brian, is like if there's a key position battle, and this isn't as much for Notre Dame, but like you use the Kyle McCord versus Devin Brown comparison, right? If Devin Brown wins that certain job, I wouldn't be shocked if Kyle McCord transfers at some point just because he's also younger, right? So when you get passed up by younger players, that's usually kind of a telltale sign. And these kids want to go play somewhere, right?
Like,
so I think
are you saying he'll leave like now, like before the season
starts? I'm just saying
that's,
at some point there will probably be an exit from the program at some point. Yeah, if they lose a key like that.
I think Brian Smith sent me a thing like 60% of teams in college football this year have transfers starting at quarterback. I mean, kids just don't want to wait their time anymore. Like, to me, it would make more sense if Kyle McCord left than it would be if Devin Brown left if he got beat out. Like, if Kyle McCord gets beat out by a younger player, okay, dude. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. After the season, I get it. If Devin Brown left, like, dude, for all you know, Kyle McCord's going to go out this year and light the world on fire. And but Dwayne Haskins was a starter for 1 year and was a top 20 NFL draft pick. Like, yeah, but that's the world we live in now, right? I mean, if you don't get your way right away, it's literally accepted that you can just leave. It's acceptable now. There's always a time and a place for a kid to leave, always. And I can't sit there and say that transferring is a sign of anything negative in itself because I transferred. But what was your reason for it? Sometimes it's like, you know what? Yeah, I get it, kid. I do. You want to play ball. I understand. There's a right and a wrong way to do it. But for some other kids, it's just like, well, things didn't work out, so I'm out of here. It's like, man, you're not going to compete at all?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah. We had a question from JHT 1988. Who on both sides of the ball do you see being the guy who steps up when things aren't going well and play needs to be made? That's a good question. I can see Audric being that guy. Sam Hartman hopefully being that guy. Jaden Thomas is probably my best bet at wide receiver.
They're going to need somebody at receiver to step up and be that guy on offense this year, Ryan. I don't know who that's going to be, and you hope that it's Audric in the run game. And you hope that Sam Hartman can be that money player. We've seen him do it, right? And as we said before, this is some kid that transferred from a group of 5 school or the FCS level. This is a kid that's played in a Power 5 conference championship game during his career.
Yep.
But who makes the plays when he throws it, right? That's the thing about being a quarterback is, I can put it wherever I want it, but are you going to make the play? That's the question, right? I mean, Jake Fromm can make that great throw against Notre Dame in the end zone, but Terry Godwin's the one that's got to make the catch, and he made a great catch, right? And to me, that was the biggest difference in that game, Ryan, is Brandon Wimbush put 2 balls late in the game right where they needed to be to his receivers, and they just dropped them, on in cuts when they're trying to win the game. And Javon Wims goes out there and makes a circus catch over top of Nick Watkins to set up the game-winning score. Terry Godwin makes a great one-handed catch against Julian Love. Their receiver stepped up in money situations, and Notre Dame's didn't. I mean, that's what happened that game. And that was, to me, one of the biggest differences in that football game. So, somebody's have to do it. Defensively, I mean, you've got to hope that one inside guy and one outside guy steps up front. I mean, that's going to be that was one of the most underappreciated aspects of that 2018 team, Ryan, was how clutch Khalid Kareem was that season. Didn't have blow you away stats. I had double-digit tackles for loss, which is good. I had like 4.5 sacks in 2018. But I could probably name you just about every sack he had because of just how it was a big moment. I know he had one late against Michigan. I know he had one late against Pitt. He was just always kind of that, when a play needed to be made, Khalid would make it. And you need guys like that. Who else is going to be on defense? When we saw Morrison kind of be that guy last year. I was on this morning. I was on with Danny Cannell and Dusty Dvorak, and they kind of asked me about a guy on defense that I can't remember the question of step up kind of guy. And I said, look, we could talk about Cam Hart and Riley Mills, but the guy that I really want people to watch is Xavier Watts, because he's just, that strikes me as the kind of guy, Ryan, that's going to be exactly this type of player. Just that when a play, because there was never a bigger game was on the line, make a clutch play guy at Notre Dame in the last 6-7 years, in my opinion, on defense than Alohi Gilman. Sure. I mean, just you think of, he had 2 huge plays against Michigan, the forced fumble against Van. He just was, every time a play needed to get made, it seemed like on the back level, Alohi was making it. And I could see Xavier Watts being something like that for this defense this year. That may be wishful thinking, Ryan, but I think Xavier's the one guy that has that type of ability for me.
Hope so. Sure do.
Yeah, we'll find out, right?
Yeah.
That's what's so great about this weekend. Like, we're starting to get a sense of, okay, this is what we think it's going to be, but now we get to find out.
Yeah. We had a super chat from Ryan Loftus. Thank you so much, Ryan. Great name, by the way. Do you guys anticipate a giant beer chug during the Notre Dame game like we saw with Nebraska last year? We're in Dublin, Ireland. There's going to be a lot of beer that is being chugged. Trust me, sir.
Whether or not ESPN or NBC puts it on the TV, that remains to be seen. But yes, there will be that at Notre. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, a bunch of Notre Dame fans in another country. Yes, that will be.
My brother-in-law is from Scotland, legitimately from Scotland, and yes, they drink a lot of beer over in the UK and the surrounding area. There's no doubt about that.
Although my wife tells me the beer there's a lot different than the kind of beer you tend to get here.
Yes.
So she actually likes foreign beer, the darker stuff. I don't know if that's what they serve in Ireland, though. I have no idea.
I'm not sure. I just know my brother-in-law loves Tennent's is his favorite beer out in Scotland. So I don't know if that's a
interesting
thing that they drink in Ireland as well. I have no idea. Another super chat from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Thank you so much, Charlie. Hi, IB. Are you guys surprised at reports that Keon Keeley is playing the 4th team at Alabama? I really think he would be starting or at least playing a good amount at Notre Dame as a freshman. I know Alabama has talent, but that deep?
I haven't paid. Guys, look. I'm trying to keep up with what's going on at Notre Dame in fall camp. I don't read all those other reports.
I would
not
be
overly surprised.
I would be surprised if Keon Keeley wasn't playing a decent bit as a freshman. Starter? Charlie, they have Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell coming back. Right. So, I didn't expect him to start, but he'll play, I think.
But also, Nick Saban is the master manipulator, right? So, you're going to want to keep a guy hungry early on. And then say, hey, I need you to prove yourself a little bit more. I think that's an important aspect of it, too. Nick Saban's great at that. So this could be something that's like, hey, let's humble this kid a little bit. But it's also not a surprise because we've seen this at Alabama. We've seen tons of great players that saw almost no playing time as a freshman. You got to go earn it. And he'll have to earn it just like everybody else. And yeah, would Keon be playing as a freshman Notre Dame? I'd be shocked if Keon's not in the rotation right now. But you know what? This is what Keon chose to do, and I wish him all the best in whatever his decision is. But yeah, still wish he was at Notre Dame, no doubt about it. I hope he wishes he was at Notre Dame and then decides to get into the portal after the season and come back to Notre Dame. I would take that.
Yeah. We had a question from Mike Sullivan. Does Notre Dame have to does Notre Dame
get rid of that
right.
have.
Does Notre Dame get more practices this year since they have a week 0 game?
Yeah, technically they do, because Notre Dame's season is 1 week longer than everybody else's. Now, that gets negated by the time we get to the postseason. So let's just say, assuming Notre Dame plays a team that played in the conference championship, right, Ryan? So like Notre Dame gets basically a week and a half to a week head start on everybody else, along with Navy. USC also got a similar head start because they play in week 0. So USC will be the one team that Notre Dame plays this year after Navy that they won't have the advantage on, but they started earlier than everybody else. And so really up and through the final week of the regular season, they're going to have an extra week of preparation because they get one more bye week than most teams. So like Notre Dame and USC both get 2 byes. USC's is actually at the end of the year. Did you see that, Ryan? They play UCLA in the week before Thanksgiving, and then they're off the week of Thanksgiving. And I think that was true a couple years ago as well. I think they've done this before, USC, where when they are when they're trying to think when they I think they let me see. No, they played BYU a couple years ago. There's another year that they played. They took off after UCLA, I believe. But yeah, that's their bye week is end of the year, so they'll have like one kind of in season. Notre Dame has 2 in the month of November, but that gets negated once those teams get the conference championship week of preparation in. Then it's kind of negated, and when you get to the postseason, they all have the same amount of practice time. But yeah, throughout they'll have an extra week of practice time on Ohio State, an extra week of practice time on NC State, an extra week of practice on Duke and Louisville and Clemson and Pitt. But by the time, Ryan, you get to October and November, that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Like maybe it gives them an advantage against NC State, maybe a slight advantage against Ohio State. But once you get past like game 4,
it's evened out at that point.
Yeah. And game 4 might be stretching it. It might not be more than a couple games, honestly. I'll probably say game 3, because like NC State will have like 1 game in preparation for Notre Dame, whereas Ohio State will have 3. That's Western Kentucky, Indiana, and Youngstown State. They'll be prepared for Notre Dame. That extra week, I don't think will have a huge impact in that game. Maybe it could, but I think once you get past NC State, it's not going to have an impact on any other good teams you play.
Poor Tennessee State is going to be cold with Notre Dame having a game under their belt.
Yeah. That's not going to be good.
D-Troll Hunter, is it part of Brian's superstition to shave fresh for game week, the first game of the season?
No, I mean, you guys put a lot more thought into my shaving patterns than I do. I've told you this is when I shave, when I'm tired of what I have on my face. That's
upkeeping it.
Literally the thought process. I look in the mirror and be like, yeah, I'm annoyed with this. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Shave it off. You guys put a lot more thought into that than I do. So there was no rhyme or reason to it. I literally did it today before I took a shower. So, yeah.
There you go.
So, yeah. Sorry. I wish there was a better story for you, but
you should have made something up. Should have made a better story.
Let me read this one, Ryan, because I think this is more geared towards you. So this is from Tony Stengel. Says to Ryan's comment about this team having swag. Do you think that's due to having a quarterback like Hartman, whereas compared to last year, it was a big question mark at quarterback?
I think it's part of it, Tony. I mean, I think that is it important to have an experienced quarterback that has a little bit of swagger to him? 100%. I don't think that hurts anything. I would say though, from like the overarching impact, I think it's more about comfortability as far as what the expectations are on the program under a head coach in year 2. And honestly, I think that Marcus Freeman wants this, right? Like he wants a little bit more competitive fire in these practice settings. So yes, does Sam Hartman help that? Does he help to take that to another level? For sure. But also I think that it's just more about Marcus Freeman really getting the swagger into his program in year 2. So I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think that Hartman certainly is a part of that for sure.
It doesn't hurt, to your point, Ryan, because a lot of the swagger we see is honestly in fall camp is coming from the defense.
Yeah.
I don't think it's because, boy, we got Sam Hartman. So I just think it's the nature of the guys that are playing. I think it's year 2 in Marcus Freeman's tenure as head coach. It's You now know more of what Al Washington wants from you, what Al Golden wants from you, what Mike Mickens wants from you, what Chris O'Leary wants from you. You're more comfortable in what you're being asked to do schematically. So you're not have to think as much. You can just go play and be fast and make plays. So I think there's a lot of things that factor into it. But at the end of the day, Ryan, to your point is, if you don't have that, you just don't have that. I mean, you can enhance things, but if you're someone who doesn't have confidence, there's no drill that's going to make you have confidence. If you're just someone who's naturally not confident, it's one thing for a young kid who's swimming to lack confidence and then something happens that kind of gets him going. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a guy who just naturally is just not a swaggy type of player. Like, I promise you, if you were to talk to, and again, this is just my opinion, but I'd be willing to bet you money that if you talk to Deion Sanders' mom, she would start talking about how he was that way when he was in Pop Warner. Like, it just kind of how was his personality. You know what I mean?
Either in you or it's not in a lot of
and that's okay. Right? It's not a bad thing. I mean, some guys are just more quiet, but it doesn't mean that they're, but if you're not a guy that plays with some ferocity and some passion and fire just by nature, then that doesn't get turned on because you have a quarterback that you have confidence in, right? It's more about your own thing, your own confidence level and what you're being asked to do. And then that part of you comes out. Like Jason Onye, that's just who he is. Right? Like Al Washington didn't have a course with him in the offseason. Okay, here's how I want you to act in practice. I want you to be talking all the time. Mike Mickens did sound with Jaden Mickey and say, hey, okay, here's the thing, Jaden. I need you to be my talkative guy. That's just who Jaden is. I mean, it's just how he is, right? And just kind of plays into that one. And into
those
that,
guys,
in my opinion.
You need a balance of those type of guys, like the subtle, confident guys that don't talk, the talkers. Like you need
Ryan. You cannot have 11 dudes on defense that are just nonstop yapping. I mean, you just can't.
That's just the defensive backs, man.
And Miami was that way. Miami had probably more obnoxious guys than most, but they had plenty of guys that were just going out there and doing their job. You know what I mean? Like, and do it hard and aggressively and play with passion, but just weren't just this all the time.
I tell you what, man, the guys that always worried me most were the silent killers. You know what I'm saying?
I've said that. Like if you're getting into a street fight, the guy that's like being held back by his buddies running his mouth, that guy does not want that smoke at all. No. The guy I'm worried about is the one that just starts walking at you. Like, okay, this dude's about to do some
I think I told this story before, but like it was my junior year. I was playing against a team where they had this kid that played at ECU, went to East Carolina. This offensive tackle, Max Hay, he was like 6'7", 6'8", like 300 pounds. This dude was massive. And I was talking to him, dude, like all game. I was mouthing off to him. And I probably shouldn't have because he didn't say a word to me all game. The very next play, he knocked my hands down and gave me an uppercut across the chin during the play. And I'm like, oh, okay, I probably shouldn't talk to that guy anymore. Like that was the only time I ever saw stars in a football game.
I finally pushed too far. I have finally gone too far.
Don't talk to that guy. Got it.
I'm shocked that Ryan was a trash talker in games. Shocked.
I was. Yeah.
That's my sarcastic voice, by the way.
Oh man, Tom Farley says, "Then will you see?" This is in response to how Notre Dame might counteract the option offense. Then will we see Riley Mills line up on the inside or outside shade versus the midline, or adjust on the fly?
Well, you don't really know when midline's coming, so you can't really adjust in preparation for the midline. You don't know when they're going to run it. I think what I like to do, Ryan, with my defensive linemen is I like moving around my second level pieces and my third level pieces against the option. My first level guys, I don't like to move around a lot. Now, when I say move around, I'm not talking about going from a 1 to a 1, a 2I to a 2 to a 3. I'm talking about you don't go from D tackle to end, strong side to weak side. Like I want you you're inside. You'll have different techniques. You're playing over the ball this time. You're playing inside the shade of the guard. You may be playing outside shade of the guard, whatever. But I want to have guys you're an inside guy or you're an outside guy because I have very distinct, different responsibilities for my inside guy. Like I'm never going to have an outside guy, or an inside guy play the pitch. You know what I mean? Where I may have an end guy play a pitch. I want Riley Mills inside, blowing up the fullback or blowing up the quarter. If Riley Mills isn't hitting the fullback or quarterback on every play, one or the other, depending on the call, then you're doing something wrong. I don't want Riley Mills chasing pitch guys or trying to squeeze down on a quarterback. I want him coming off and hitting people in the face as quickly as possible. That's what I want. And I want my rangier guys playing that position a little bit more.
I would not hate if Notre Dame goes to some 3-man fronts, because I always like to go odd fronts against option teams, because it's just like the numbers game, right? Like I don't want even numbers on one side or the other, just for like the numbers conversation. I wouldn't mind Riley Mills at times being at nose and just being like, "Hey, dude, just go wreck stuff, like go wreck it." You know what I mean? Like I would not hate that at all.
It's funny when I coached in the option, I always preferred 4 down, because it allowed us to get a clear. Well, it plays into what you're saying, Ryan. As an offensive guy, I wanted 4 down.
Oh yeah.
Because it could help me get more of a clear numbers, right?
Yeah.
Where when teams would play like in a now my personal thing is I think 4 down can do the most damage if it's done right to an option.
Yeah.
But a 3 down can create the most confusion from an option offense, because the number counts, because the option is built around numbers. It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And certain numbers are, okay, 3 is the pitch guy, or 1 is the dive key, 2 is this, 3 is that, 4 is that. It's in a 3-3 look, because of the different ways you can attack guys, it's harder to get a count on who that guy is and then what that guy can do from that. A 3 technique can only do so much against the option.
Sure.
2 stack linebackers can do a whole lot of different things, and that's what. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you, but looking at it from an offensive standpoint, I wanted teams to be in the 4 down look as opposed to a 3-3.
Because you got to think about the nose in the 3-man front. He's so tough from a numbers perspective, from an offensive perspective, because if he slants to the front side, that's 2 on the front side now, right? Down lineman. If he slants away, that's only 1 comparative to 1.5 that you were considering to start the play. So numbers can just change so much with a 3 down, especially with that nose.
Now, here's the second part. If your personnel wasn't good, I was praying for you to be in the 3 down. If you don't have the personnel and you try to go 3 down against an option, you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
That's the other part of it. But if all things being equal, a 3 down can give you a lot of different problems. Yes. Right? I mean, it can. I think the greatest way to attack the option is if you have a butt-kicking 4 down defense where one of your ends is a really rangy guy. Yep. That to me is a big key. Really big key.
We had a super chat from Gregory Perez. Thank you so much, Gregory. Who do you guys believe will be the unsung hero of the team? Someone who the national media gives little to no attention to, who you believe will be the heart and soul player on this team? Xavier Watts is a good one that you mentioned earlier. Yep. Like, I think that he could be that type of guy.
I think JD Bertrand's one of those guys. I don't know if JD is ever going to get a lot of national attention. He just doesn't look the part.
Yeah.
Jack Kaiser is a guy who could maybe have not a lot of production on a raw stat standpoint, but you're just like, man, he's so important to this team. Howard Cross is another guy that I think of when I think of that.
That's a good one.
And if this Notre Dame offense is really, really good, I think the unsung hero is going to be Zeke Correll. I just think he'll have to be really good, and he'll never get the praise because you got a great right tackle, great left tackle. Your guards will get a lot of the hype, the running back, the quarterback, the receivers, all that stuff. But if this team is really good on offense, it's because Zeke Correll has taken his game to another level as part of other things going right. You know what I mean? Like Zeke could be great and the offense still not be great. But I don't think you can have an elite offense if Zeke's not really, really good. And he'll never get the credit for it. Again, because he doesn't necessarily look the part, but it's more about you just got big time tackles and a quarterback signing, $1 million deals for NIL, and you got Audric and you've got all these other personalities. But yeah, he'll be part of that. He could really be part of that.
That's a good one. I think it's a guy that doesn't necessarily look like that guy on the hoof. Like if their defensive line plays great this year, Riley Mills is going to get a lot of talk, right? Because that guy looks like $1 million. Like he just looks like that type of guy. Howard Cross does not, but he's still really instrumental football player to what you wouldn't do up front.
Right. I mean, you look, JD, every almost like say a chunk of Notre Dame fans want JD Bertrand to be gone, right? No longer starting lineup. And my whole thing is, Jalen Smith won the Butkus Award with 114 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, and a sack. JD Bertrand in 2021 had 101 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 1.5. That's not a big difference, right? Because Jalen just looked different doing it. Not just he physically looks different, but it's just like, holy moly. Jalen could have 4 tackles in a game, but you remembered every single one of them because it was so flashy, right? Where people want JD bench because he doesn't look the part. He doesn't make those crazy, like JD Bertrand's never going to make that play that Jalen made against Michigan in 2014. You remember that? They were running outside zone away from him. He was backside and he chases it down like that. And so to your point, it's just like he's never going to me, make those really crazy, flashy plays that makes you be like, that dude's a stud. The way that Jeremiah Owusu did, the way that Jalen did, the way that Manti did, guys like that. But then you just look down at the end of the day and you're like, that dude had 9 solo tackles, and 2 tackles for loss. There's still people that don't think JD Bertrand played well against Clemson. I've literally had this conversation with people, Ryan.
Where he didn't play that well against Clemson
last year. By far his best game last year. He had 12 total tackles, including 9 solo tackles and 2 tackles for loss in that game and a sack. And I've literally had people tell me that I don't remember him making a single play. I'm like, that's more of a you problem. But when Jalen made those kind of plays, when Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and they just stood out. They were flashier. They were just because the traits were so impressive. Where Drew just is more of a gritty 12 tackles and 2 tackles for loss and a sack kind of guy. Just it's a different type of thing. But that's not going to change it. I mean, if the dude can have 12 tackles, 2 tackles for loss and a sack in a 35-14 blowout victory over the number 4 team in the country, and a lot of people don't notice, there's no performance he's going to have this year that's going to all of a sudden convince people that JD's a great player. Or I'm not saying I'm just making the point that he's that kind of guy, but it'll be very important to the defense. And that's to me, the nature of the question, in my opinion. Whereas if Xavier's making a ton of plays, I think he'll get a lot of credit because safeties tend to make plays in more open
space.
Yeah, where you see it. Yeah. And wow, did you see that play? What a great play, because that's all you're looking at is that guy that made that play where, a linebacker may shoot through and make a stop and you're like, who was that? What number was that? Because you can't even see it because he's in the middle of all the trash. And I think that factors into it as well.
We had a question from Neil Wachter. Excuse me if I pronounced it wrong, Neil. My apologies. Defensive aggressiveness has been the difference against Navy in the past. Play in their backfield, they die. Read and react, they score. How can Navy adjust to a hyper-aggressive defense?
Well, there's different things you'll try to do as a triple option offense to try to create a seam. So if a team's really aggressive, Ryan, what you'll do is try to create more cross blocks to try to say, hey, if we get this right, so you may down block. So instead of just running the veer, what you may do is say, hey, they're really attacking through the big gap with their linebackers hard, man, and they're just coming at us. So I may do like a down block so my tackle comes off, and you're just trying to wash that hard stuff down and then get like a kick out from like your guards. You may down block, kick in hopes of creating a crease. Now, they may tackle it for a 2-yard loss this play, and they'll stop it for a no-yard gain the next play. And the third play, we only get 2. But that 4th time, when we hit it right, because of how aggressive you are, we crease that sucker and hits a 50-yard gain. And you're willing to live with that, knowing that you're going to have to run some of that stuff. So the other thing you can do is just you can call veer plays that are designed keeps, essentially, where you're not handing off to the fullback. Because what you're going to do is you're going to use your perimeter to create some down blocks and then maybe pull someone outside or just do your normal option. But you may seal the edge. So I'm not actually reading. You're going to block the guy that would normally be your dive key because you're trying to get it outside. Because your thinking is if we can get past that initial surge and then pitch that ball off the edge, we got a chance to go somewhere and do something. So you'll look for opportunities to create the gash plays, knowing that they're just going to kind of kick your butt more often than not. But if, to your point, Ryan, earlier, if we can hit a couple of those plays and soften them up, that's going to help us get going. Or, hey, look, if they're going to just keep crashing us like that, really aggressive, we've only got to hit 2 pass plays and we get 100 yards. I mean, that's,
over the top.
It takes one guy to make a mistake. That's the thing about the triple is, and the way that they run it is, one guy makes a mistake against the option and it's a big play. Yep. No offense requires you to be as assignment correct snap after snap after snap as this offense, in my opinion, which is why a team like Navy that is incredibly inferior to most of college football from a talent standpoint wins games.
Yeah.
It's because of the demands of that system. in my opinion.
This is one of those situations where it's how anybody defeats the blitz, in my opinion, Neil. And I know you're talking about hyper aggressive. It's not necessarily just saying blitzing, but you beat the blitz by throwing into the blitz. Like you attack where the defender is no longer located. I mean, Kurt Warner was one of the best quarterbacks I ever saw defeating blitzes because he could decipher where the blitz is coming from and he would just throw behind it, right? And that's the same thing whether we're talking about a play action pass, creating a chunk play, or work into the pitch man where you have a numbers advantage, maybe into the boundary, let's say, or something like that, right? It's finding the weakness and attacking it in different ways. Like that's it's basic stuff. I know it's a lot more basic of analysis as it actually is in actuality, but like that's really all it comes down to is find where the numbers are still in your advantage and throw to it or run to it. That's the name of the game at the end of the day.
All right.
We got Scott Ellis says, sorry if already discussed, but how much or a chance
Actually, sorry, I meant to he started that one and then I wanted to pull up the next one. Sorry.
Gotcha. Sorry if discussed already. What kind of role will Junior Tuilamaka? I think he's a Viper play this season. Has he earned in practice some significant game minutes? Can he be an impact player there?
Impact player in flashes, yes. I mean, isn't that what you kind of want a backup guy to be, Ryan? Is in spots to be an impact guy. I mean, if he was a true impact guy, he'd be starting. But he'll have his moments this year where I think he's going to do that. I think he's certainly earned the opportunity to play. He's going to be he was doing that last year. I mean, I've heard people say, well, we're going to get a chance to see what he can do as a Viper this year. I'm like, well, we kind of already saw that. He was playing more Viper at the end of last year than he was linebacker. I know they moved him to Mike in the fourth quarter against BC, but that was in garbage time. When he wasn't playing in garbage time, it was as basically a Viper, essentially.
Wasn't he playing he was playing a Viper against Navy, wasn't he? If I remember correctly,
I believe so. I mean, you and I saw him do it against Syracuse. We watched him play that position against Syracuse. So he'll play. He'll play there. I think Josh Burnham's going to play there. Josh has been kind of training on both sides, field and Viper. But yeah, he'll play. Can he be an impact guy? We'll see. I think he's got a chance to be. Look, I loved him as a Mike linebacker, Ryan. Loved him as a Mike linebacker. And every time we saw him play last year, he impressed. For whatever reason, they decided to go a different direction. I don't know how good of a Viper he's going to be. I don't have that same level of confidence that I know that like I thought he could have been as a Mike. But he's a strong kid. He's a good athlete for his size. He's a smart football player. And those things, and he's got a great motor. Those things alone are going to allow him to make plays at times. The question is going to be for him and Burnham is like, okay, can they be that consistently? That's going to be the question for them this year. But yeah, Junior's going to have a chance to still be a good football player. He's just too good of a football player for me to say, nah, just because he's not at the position I like them best, he can't help you. I think that would very much be selling him short. Scott, that's not what you're saying. I'm just saying, I don't know what he's going to be, but I anticipate Junior being a dude for Notre Dame at some point in time. It may not be a dude from a high volume standpoint, but just like, man, like, Burnham will have like the really flashy plays. And you look down like Junior, I don't remember Junior playing. He's got 7 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. And you know what I mean? Like he'll be that kind of guy as a Viper for me, where Josh will like, did you see that one play where Burnham just exploded past the tackle for a sack? Like you'll remember those. Yeah. Junior will just have that real gritty, strong performance where you're like, man, that guy got balled out today, man.
Burnham had a flash play against, what was it, Boston College or whatever, where he had like the tackle for loss on that one.
From the backside.
Yeah. He's one of those guys. Yep. Archer 452, which true freshman will play the most snap this year? Jaden Greathouse will be my pick.
Yeah, it'd be my guess.
Wide receiver.
It'll be him, barring injury. Obviously, if there's an injury outside, then I think Rico will then play a bunch. It could be him.
Yeah.
As of right, Christian Gray maybe on defense has the best shot. I mean, look, anytime there's an injury, that guy's going to play. Like if one of the linebackers goes down, then either Jaden Osbury or Drake Bowen's going to play a bunch more. Right. But just where things stand right now, the only guy that I know for a fact is going to be rotating in a lot as a freshman right away is Jaden Greathouse. That's the only guy for a fact that we know is going to play a bunch at this point in time. I could see Cooper Flanagan playing a bunch, and we don't even recognize it because he's the number 3 tight end and 13 personnel. I mean, we could see something like that. Yep. But Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Greathouse is that guy right now.
Yep. Archer again with a back-to-back says, which new starter, Hartman not included, will have the biggest impact best season? New starter.
Well, I'm hoping that it's Tobias Merriweather, and not so
Good
much
one.
from a personal I like Tobias standpoint, but if that X position, or it's actually the Z now, if that Z position, Ryan, is an impact position in this offense, that field outside receiver, it is really hard to stop this Notre Dame offense because of the way that you have to play it, the way that you have to play that far outside guy. If he's a difference maker, and if you want exhibits of it, go watch against 2015 when teams had the way they had to defend Will Fuller. Now, he's not Will Fuller. I'm trying to make a point of that's really the only time we've seen at Notre Dame that a field outside guy was a difference maker. And it just opened up so many opportunities for you. You know, whether the running backs coming out of the backfield on wheel routes, whether it's the running game having more room to work, whether it's one-on-ones in the slot and the backside all game because you have to worry about that other guy. If Tobias has a big impact, if you take Hartman away, and I've made this case before, him breaking out has a bigger impact on more parts of the offense than anybody else breaking out, in my opinion. And that's why I'd go with Tobias.
Tobias is a good one. I also thought about Jordan Patelho because I think that he could be your best sack guy potentially. I know he started one game last year, but
that's that. I don't count that.
String.
Yeah.
Right. He would be one. Yeah, he would.
Xavier Watts would be one. I mean, he along the same lines. I mean, there's not a whole lot. Here's the thing, right? There's not a whole lot of new starters on defense.
There's not.
I mean, you don't have a new starter.
It's a pretty senior laden team overall, man.
And even Xavier Watts is kind of stealing a little bit because he started like 3 games at the end of the year last year, right? I mean, to your point, it's a very veteran team. I'll put it to you like this. There is not a position on the Notre Dame defense, whether they're in their base defense or nickel defense, where the guy in the starting lineup has not started at least one game in his career. And there's only one guy that hasn't started multiple games in his career, and that's Jordan Patelho. Riley Mills has been a full-time starter. Howard Cross has been a full-time starter. Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Now, if Nana starts, he actually has a career start under his belt, but he'd be in the Patelho role. It was kind of off the bench and that kind of thing. Nana started, but I wouldn't call him necessarily a starter.
Sure.
But you're at worst 9 guys that have started multiple games starting for you next year. And then you've got guys starting coming off the bench. And you think about that. I mean, if Nana's in the game, that means you've Javonte Jean-Baptiste has started before, not a ton. He'd be another guy like in that kind of category, but he's the same position as Nana. All your linebackers have played a ton. The secondary, Ramon Henderson started a bunch of games. Xavier Watts has started games. DJ Brown started a bunch of games. Antonio Carter started a bunch of games. Thomas Harper started a bunch of games. Right? Jaden Mickey has started games. Clarence Lewis started on a playoff team. And right now, he was listed behind Christian Gray on the 2 deep, in the first 2 deep, which says a lot about it. So, yeah, we focus on the freshmen, Ryan, but to your point, this is a very veteran team. And I was talking to somebody, I think on the message board about this, but there's a lot of people worried about the USC game because it is finals, midterm week.
Sure.
And I said, I was worried about that at first too, until I remembered how many of the defensive players are graduates. I mean, think about this. When you look at the Notre Dame defense this year, their starting defensive line, Jordan Patelho is the only guy who's not a graduate. That's it. All of your linebackers have graduated, and the only secondary guy who's in the starting rotation that is not graduating is Benjamin Morrison. That's it. Xavier Watts has graduated. DJ has graduated. Ramon has graduated. Antonio Carter obviously has graduated. Thomas Harper's graduated. Cam Hart's graduated. Jack Kaiser, J.D. Bertrand, Maris Luafal have all graduated. Riley Mills has graduated. Howard Cross has graduated. Nana's graduated. Javonte Jean-Baptiste has graduated. And Jordan Patel's going into a senior year, which means his workload's probably be a little lighter. The reason that matters is because the majority of and I'm more worried about the defense during midterm week than I am the offense, because the defense has to adjust and change a little bit more week to week, in my opinion, than the offense does, the way that Al Gold runs his defense. Well, I just pointed out, Ryan, 9 of your 11 starters don't have midterms.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's your concern. So it just kind of like, man, wow, this defense is really old. Like very veteran group, and it's not just old
is.
grade wise, but all these guys have played a bunch of football.
Experienced, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I think this defense is going to be pretty good, because they'll play even beyond their talent level to a degree, meaning like they'll be closer to max, not beyond. You can't play beyond. They will play to the maximum of their talent level, more so than you'll get out of a younger guy, in my opinion. And what we saw last year as well.
Spencer Schrader, sleeper pick, kicker.
There you go. There you go.
No, he started at South Florida, but like hasn't started a game.
I'm hoping the answer on for that on special teams is like Devin Ford or Chris Tyree. One of the two returners makes big plays. I hope that we see that this year in the return game.
Let's hope. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says if you could have one college football analyst from any company, ESPN, Fox, etc., to have an Irish breakdown for an interview, who would you choose and why? You guys are awesome, and I'll be back on the board soon.
You know, that's a good one. It'd be, honestly, it's one of two guys from the same broadcast team. I would love to sit down and get Gus Johnson's story. Like that'd be cool, like a really fun, like, you know, where did this all come to be? Like, what's your background? What's your story? How did you get here? And like, when did this, you know, like persona come to pass the way he is? And then, or you just find out like, that's just how the dude is, man. Like the dude's just intense. And then also, honestly, from all the analysts, the only guy that I would really think about, and I guess when I'm thinking analysts, I'm kind of thinking guys doing the TV stuff. Joel Klatt. There was a top 10 quarterbacks list that was out. It was attributed to Joel Klatt. That was terrible. He said it's not his list, which made me feel much better. Yeah, he said that's not my list because it was so bad. And I'm like, I normally even when I disagree with Joel, I respect him. Like he has Notre Dame too low in his top 25. And I thought there was a little bit of inconsistency, but it's like you're disagreeing with someone who's making a football argument and you can respect it, you know? But if you're to kind of go like in studio analysts, I mean, it's just really sad, Ryan, that I just don't know that there's a lot of those guys that I'd care to like. Some of the stuff I heard Dan Mullen say this offseason, and I've always been a defender of Dan Mullen, and I've told you how he helped my career, and I'm just like, dude, like, I don't know who you are anymore. You're saying some silliness.
Danny
There's just not. I mean, who am I going to talk? Desmond Howard, Lee Corso, Kirk Herbstreit, pass. You know, I mean, just.
I guess I go Herbstreit if I had to pick one of those guys. But
you know who it might be? Aaron Taylor, because I'd want to hear some old Joe Moore stories. That's what I would want to do. I'd want to hear some stories about that team. What was it like blocking Bryant Young in practice? What was Joe Moore like? What was Coach Holtz like? You know, that might be fun.
I would like to bring Desmond Howard on and interview him, but mute his mic and not tell him that it's muted.
That'd be one of the greatest troll jobs ever.
Of all time, right?
But how would you know what he's saying to respond to him? That'd be the only thing.
I'd just shake my head like.
And then just go on to the next question.
Yeah, next question.
Gotcha.
Exactly. No follow-ups.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what would happen is the people that feed him stuff would be like, "Hey, dude, your mic, that guy's not hearing you," and then he'd start talking about you, and then you'd be like, "Yeah, you're right.
Sure." Yeah.
Make for the most entertaining show ever. All right.
Oh, gosh.
Let's go.
Joshua Board, I believe with Sam Hartman and improved receiver play that the passing game will be much improved. Are there going to be any new wrinkles in the running game?
Yes, there will be.
I think.
Yeah, we can't. Obviously, I can't get into specifics. I'll be able to point them out after we see them in games. But definitely a lot of different wrinkles in the run game this year. Formationally, but also just scheme-wise, Ryan. We saw a lot of different things in the run game this year. There's no doubt.
Yep.
And that'll be something that we'll break down as we, we'll be able to break that down kind of once we get into breaking down the film on the message board. We'll get into more specifics about those type of things.
If Coach Parker's listening, more running diversity is the way to my heart, sir. So make that
I think he's going to win your heart over, Ryan. I think in that regard, certainly.
I'm here for it, man. I'm here for it. Seek and destroy. Which position group are you most excited to see on Saturday? Defensive line. I'm going to take
one. I'm going to cheat, Ryan, and take one on each side of the ball. You already nailed one of them, D-line, no doubt about it. Offensive line for me. I'm not quite sold right now that this offensive line is going to be great. Just because of some of the, Zeke's banged up, but then the issue with left guard and Billy Stroud not, and then, how good's Rocco going to be? I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but I don't know. When I say I don't know, it's not me saying I think they're not going to be good. It's me literally saying I don't know how good they're going to be. I
Sure.
literally don't know. Do I think Rocco can be a good player? Yes, I do. But you know how many times I've seen him play how many meaningful snaps I've seen him play at Notre Dame? Bingo. I mean, the two starting guards against Navy have played 0 meaningful snaps at Notre Dame. Now, they may be great because you know how many meaningful snaps Quentin Nelson played before the Texas game in 2015? 0. You know what I mean? So, like, it doesn't mean that you won't be good. It just means I don't know.
That's so funny that it was that recent that the redshirt rule was there where you couldn't play a single snap or else you burned it. That's pretty funny. Yeah.
But like if Shrouth was playing, Ryan, the reason I would be a little bit more optimistic is because I feel like the talent would at least win out. You'd have 2 really talented guards. Yeah, we don't know about them, but they're really talented. But now it's kind of like, I don't know what the line's going to look like. So I'm hoping that it's good because I'll say this, Ryan, if Notre Dame goes out there against Navy and runs on them, that's going to be a great sign because they've got 6 of their 7 front 7 guys are back. Starting guys are back from last year. They got 9 starters coming back on defense from one of the best defenses in college football last year. Run defenses. I'm very clear. Sorry, I said defenses. I meant run defenses because their pass defense is horrible. But like if they just come out like throw all over Navy and win, blow out and run for 140 yards, I'm like, all right, whatever. You know, okay, I guess we're going to find out in a couple weeks against NC State. But if they come out and run for like a $180, $190, 200 yards, or even maybe if it's not a lot of yards, Ryan, because Navy's just loading the box, but they're like ripping off big runs against them. They go for a $150, $160, but they only carry it like 25 times. I'm like, okay, these guys are going to be really good. So because this is not a team you just go out there and just run over. They're just because they're not going to make the mistake Clemson did. They're not going to play their base defense. But they're not going to play a base defense because their base defense is not a base defense. It's a very, like you said, it's
base defense.
Right. They're just going to line up and, hey, here's who you have, and play straight up. And our guys are better than your guys. They don't play that way because they know that they're not. So if you can do well against that, that'll be a very good sign. Very good sign. And so that's a group like if the receivers go out there and dominate Navy, okay. I kind of expect that. Navy sucks. We've seen 2 of these guys make plays already against Navy. Dion had a huge 3rd and 15 conversion against him last year. Jaden Thomas ripped them up in the first half. Okay. Their defense isn't very good. Their pass defense isn't very good. But if the O-line goes out there and balls out, then I'm going to feel really good about this team. And if they don't ball out, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be good. It just means we don't know yet. And that's probably, for me, why the offensive line gets my answer.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yep.
Next question is from T. Smith 0323. What has Avery Davis been up to? I haven't heard anything about him. Was wondering what's going on with him. Did he just sign with an NFL team pretty recently?
Lions, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe
pretty recently,
like right?
2 weeks ago, maybe something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how he's doing with the Lions. I haven't heard anything about that, but
I can kind of look real quick and see if he's done anything in the spring training. Good Lord. I'm having one of those days, Ryan. Preseason
he's down
games.
in Clearwater, man.
Yeah, I know, right? His pitchers and catchers have arrived, baby. Let's see what he's done. He did not catch a pass in the most recent game. So I don't believe he was returning kicks or anything. So I did see Brandon Joseph had an interception. That was in the opener, right?
It was a big play, too. It was a big play. Yeah.
So I don't see Avery there. And then was the Jaguars there? The Jaguars was their second game. So let me see if he did anything then. Avery Davis. No catches against them either. So I don't know how much he's playing or if he's playing, but he is, I believe, still with the Lions. So Nate Sudfeld and Teddy Bridgewater.
Oh, did you see Teddy Bridgewater? What number he's wearing?
Isn't like 50, 40 something or 49 or something like
50.
that.
Number 50.
50.
Number 50. Yeah.
What was the reason for that?
I have no idea. Zero idea.
There has to be some sort of silly reason.
Oh, there's got to be some type of symbolism, but I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Tyler Ottinger says, in garbage time of games, do you balance getting the twos good reps and not running up the score disrespectfully?
Yeah, it's an easy balance. I mean, to me, this isn't hard. I don't think putting my twos in there and running my offense is running it up. Now, again, if I'm running 4 verts, okay, maybe. But, I'm letting them throw. I need to get my backup quarterback some experience. It's your job to stop him. What I'm not doing, Ryan, is running a reverse, running trick plays, running a halfback throwback or something like that. But I'm running my offense. I think you have to do that. When you put now, if you are throwing the ball in the fourth quarter, if you're up 38-3 and there's 5 minutes left and you put your starting offense back on the field to throw the ball, you're running up the score. And that's a bit disrespectful. It's your job to stop me. I understand that, but there's just no need for that. Put your backups in, then run your offense. I'm a believer in that. If you're going to leave your starters in, just kind of get out of the game. Don't do things, run it up. But if you're going to once keep running your offense, put your backups in. Let your backups run the offense. Now, I'm also a believer that if I need a series where I'm going to go out there and run my normal offense with my ones, but I put my number 2 quarterback in, I'm okay with that too, as long as it's not too late. Because again, I need to get my young quarterback, especially some playing time. And Bobby Bowden used to have a great way of saying, he goes like, look, those kids practice hard too. Those kids deserve a chance to play. You're telling me go put them in the game and not let them run the offense? How fair is that to them? And I think he was absolutely right. That's how I believe it should be done. You put your 2s in the game, run the offense. Yeah, just all you really take out is like the trick plays and stuff like that. But I'm even okay taking a shot down the field. I mean, again, that's part of my offense. It's, it's your job to stop them. It's your 2s or your 1's job to stop my 2s. If you can't stop my 2s, then I don't want to hear crap from you, because get better. Get your team better. That's all I want to hear from you at that point in time.
Wouldn't it be nice if we actually get a game where we have to worry about that, by the way?
Yeah, would be great.
I feel like too many of those games that are supposed to be that, we're still talking about starters in the game late in the fourth quarter because it's UNLV and you didn't put them away like you were supposed to. But
yeah, it'd be really
Josh
nice.
Buffo, the motivational business banker, who in your opinion was the best captain in your Notre Dame watching history? Not just best player as a captain, but a true captain leader. That's a good one.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to just say one.
Manti.
Although, yeah, some of the stuff that happened late in the year kind of takes a little bit away from that to me, but yes, He was. Brady Quinn was a great leader. Again, my lifetime. I love how I love Josh is definitely a IB vet because he asks it watching history. So he already set that premise. But even in my watching history, I don't really know what the leaders were like in '88. I was 10. My lifetime, Brady Quinn was a great leader. I've heard that Brandon Hoyt was a really good leader on some of those teams that weren't that great. Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson were great leaders because they were tone setters.
In my mind as well.
Robert Haynes, that's a good one. Like 2020. Manti, like you said, Manti was a good one. Drew Tranquil and Alohi Gilman were really good captains. Although Alohi wasn't a captain in 18, I don't believe. But in Drew was, and he was a really good leader. Yeah, Mike McGlinchey was a great leader from a talking standpoint. Like Mike McGlinchey could be a guy that I could see getting into politics. Just and not even, I don't care what his views are. Just like someone hire him to be their spokesman because he just knows how to spin it. I mean, he just knows how to say all the things you're supposed to say at a press conference, right? I mean, and I mean that in a complimentary fashion. Those are some guys that were good leaders, in my opinion. I'm trying to think of even who some of the captains were. I mean, there was one year Harrison Smith was the team's only captain. In 2011,
that's crazy.
It was their only captain.
Crazy.
I think that kind of says a lot, about him. And there were some other guys that I don't believe that Theo Riddick was a captain in 2012. I don't believe, but I think the way he played and the way he went about his business provided sort of an example for how he set the tone, the toughness, the grittiness of that team. Who's a very underrated leader on that 2012 team? Capron Lewis Moore. Very underrated part of that 2012 leadership team. He was a captain on that team. Yeah. And he was a guy that would kind of get guys going in the locker room and stuff like that. Like Alohi wasn't a captain in 18, but dang well Alohi was a guy that was in the locker room talking and leading and doing things like that. Because sometimes you're a leader, whether you're a leader or not, or a captain or not, you're a leader. And Alohi was that guy, in my opinion.
Thomas Zimikowski was a guy that I would have ran through a brick wall for, personally. He had that just fieriness to him. We had Chris P. Bacon, who says Sam Howell is also only 6'1". Looked good in preseason. He and Hartman played against one another and worked out together. Wonder how they compare. I mean,
You want
physically
to give
they're
some thoughts on that?
similar-ish. Yeah, so one, they're similar size guys. They're both right around 6'1". Sam's a little stockier than
You're talking about
Hartman,
Sam
but like
Howell,
not like
correct?
Sam Howell is a little
Yeah.
stockier than Sam Hartman, but not by like a crazy amount. I think Sam Hartman's like between 210, 215. Sam Howell's like 220, 225 at
Sam
some
Howell, to your
points. So I
point, Ryan,
think
has a
he's a
much
little,
sturdier lower body. I mean, you just look at him
yes, he
visibly as
does.
a sturdier lower body. Like Kenny Minchie.
Yeah.
Kenny Minchie's 2'9". He's only 7 pounds bigger than Sam Hartman, but he looks a lot thicker because he's got that
Yeah.
that sturdy lower half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Howell uses that lower half as a runner. I think he's a little bit more of an efficient runner than what Sam Hartman is. At least he runs more often than Sam. I also think that Sam Howell has a little bit stronger of an arm than Hartman, but it's not like one where it's like egregiously to a higher degree. I think Hartman, though, is a little bit more of a quicker processor than Sam Howell. Sam Howell plays a little bit more leader ball, but physically, I think they're similar-ish. Like, I think it's a decent comparison. Their body types are also pretty similar.
You said Sam Howell plays more leader ball.
I'm sorry, I meant like backyard ball type of guy. Like he's
Okay,
like one of
gotcha.
those sandlot guys. Howell, yeah, he
Gotcha.
wants to
I think
just
Sam
play in the
Howell has a little bit.
sandlot, man, and yeah,
I would argue Sam Howell also has a little bit of a stronger arm as
that's what I
well.
said.
I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
said that.
I didn't hear that part. Yeah, I was still
Mhm.
trying to figure out leader ball, what that meant.
Sorry.
But I think one thing too they have in common too, they both like throwing the ball down the field. That's two of
Yeah.
the most prolific downfield passers we've seen in recent years, is Sam Howell and Sam Hartman. There's no doubt about that. All right, let's get to another one. You kept saying
Ryan
like
Rush.
when you have two core Sam Howell, Sam Hartman. That's a really
Yeah.
no. I'm saying like for me, like whenever
No.
I've called Sam Howell, Sam Hartman, how many times when I've been doing breakdowns,
Yeah.
and I've called Sam Hartman,
Mhm.
Sam Howell, how many times when I'm doing breakdowns before Sam Hartman came to Notre Dame. I would
Yeah.
always get those two guys just name wise confused. I'd call one guy the other. I mean, in my head, I knew exactly what I was talking about, but I would say the other
Yeah.
guy's name. Very confusing.
Yeah, I also meant to say hero ball instead of leader ball. That's where I was going
Gotcha.
with that. But another point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ryan Rush with a Monmouth sticker in there. What's up, man? Do you think scores will be lower this year now that the clock doesn't stop on first downs? It's possible.
My thing is, how noticeable will it be? That's what I don't know. And for tempo teams, I don't know that it's going to matter a ton. Where I think it could create lower is like teams, if you want to play offense like Stanford did back under Harbaugh and early in the David Shaw tenure. I could see that keeping points down. More NFL style of points per game, but still being really good and really efficient. Because your defense is also keeping points down. Maybe. I don't really know how much. Is it 1 or 2 points per game per team, like on average? I don't know. I mean, how much of a difference is that going to make? It's not going to make a team scoring 49 start scoring 35, right? Like, but maybe team scoring 49 scores 44. I really don't know.
It's possible.
If you're efficient,
it makes
Ryan,
sense.
you're still going to score, right?
Yeah.
And if you're an efficient team, you're still going to score.
Less stoppages, which means less plays, which means less scoring in theory. So that's
Right.
we'll see. Shall see.
Yep. All right.
Chris P. Bacon, is Riley Mills substantially better than last year?
He's bigger than he was last year. He's more explosive than he was last year. Is that going to translate to being a better player? That I don't know. I'll say this. Riley Mills physically looks much better than he did a year ago. And we've talked about this. You don't see guys making that kind of fifth-year leap like he's made physically. But that doesn't always mean it's going to translate into what we see on Saturday. He's been pretty good in practices, but with a lot of these kids, it's like we need to see it. And somebody asked me, can't believe Maris is starting. I'm like, well, if you've been at all the practices we've been at, you'd be like, yeah, Maris should start a linebacker. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to hype him up to where he's finally going to be the guy we thought. No, I need to see it. I hope he does. I need to see it. Same with Riley. I think Riley Mills is going to be a really good football player this year. I hope he is going to be a really good football player this year. Is he going to be one? Am I betting my mortgage on it? No. I need to see it. Will I be shocked if he is? No, I won't. But we just got to see it. Before you start talking about better, I need to see it on Saturday. Is he more impressive looking? Is he moving more impressively? Absolutely. Did you see the picture that Marcus Freeman put out the other day of Riley Mills wishing him happy birthday?
Yep.
Marcus
guy,
Freeman
man.
is a 6'1", 200 he whatever pound former starting linebacker at Ohio State, and Riley Mills made him look really small. And Marcus Freeman still works out, right? I mean, he's not a small dude.
Athletes are getting bigger, man. A lot of these guys are starting to make Marcus Freeman look small, and it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
I still love the picture of him and I was about to say him and Owen Streebig is still the most hilarious picture of all time when he was a sophomore in high school.
Like, it really is.
We had John Monty, who dropped a super chat. Thank you so much, John. Just worried about the injuries due to this game. You guys do a great job. Go Irish. I think it's always a concern, right? It's like, especially when you're playing an inferior opponent, like you don't want to have unnecessary injuries. Like that's just, but I mean, you can't.
You don't. Yeah, I think that the nature of this question is referring to the option. Notre Dame used to have a lot, but Ryan, they've changed the rules of
as far as like
cut blocking
and open field. And
so you can't do some of the stuff that you used to do that would create some of those injuries, and that's why we haven't seen a lot of those injuries in recent seasons. The other part of it to me also is do a better job of coaching those guys how to get off those type of blocks, right? I mean, that's part of it too. Is you can't hurt my knee if I don't ever let you get to it. Because of the technique that I'm playing at. So I think you can't cut guys like from behind as much anymore, like behind them and getting in front of them. Like, when I coached the triple option, which I hated, by the way, for a million reasons, I'd teach my receivers how to cut. Don't think you can really do that anymore. You can't really cut the second, third level the way that you did back then. So that's part of it too, John. It's not quite the same rules as it used to be, but to Ryan's point, anytime you're playing an inferior opponent, the last thing you want to have happen, not that you ever want a guy to get injured, but it's just like it just seems perception wise to sting more when it's that kind of game, especially if it's like, let's just get one more series from our ones. And then, so if I get a big lead in these first two games, I'm putting young guys in like that. I know that's bad, but I just am.
It's very understandable. Crispy Bacon, do you think top recruited players making loads of NIL money but not producing on the field will lead to locker room issues this year? Which teams, if so?
I mean, honestly, Chris, I could certainly see it. Pick any team that's paying big money to high school players. I mean, Tennessee, Bama, not Bama quite as much, but Bama to a degree, Georgia, Miami, Florida, USC, Oregon, certainly. Because it could happen in several ways. If a freshman comes in and plays, the veterans could look and say, well, he's only playing because they gave him X amount of dollars. That's the only reason he's playing. Then it's if a guy's not playing, he's complaining and whining about, I'm not playing. And, then it's like, I got all this money. He's not even playing. You gave him all this money. He's not even playing. I'm making nothing. And I'm the star. You gave me $10,000 because I'm already here. And you gave this kid who's never played it down $500,000. And then, but that also comes down to what's your team leadership like? Because if you have good team leadership, they don't let that happen. Like, hey, hold on a second now. We're going to squash this right this second because I don't give a crap what you made. When you leave that outside, that's what you do. You spend when you're here, we're all here. There's no, this is what defines how you're going to be. But that's asking a lot of 20 and 21 and 20-year-old leaders. These aren't 9-year NFL vets that have been through the contract negotiations before, right? I mean, this is a different animal, especially since a lot of these veterans came to that school before that was even a thing. That makes even a weirder dynamic. Yep. So, I mean, pick any school that's paying a lot of high school players to come, and that's where you can have those problems. And then, we heard a little bit about like Tennessee last year. Some of the players on that team were mad because Joe Hendon Hooker was getting off. I mean, but again, that right there, when you're mad about your 6th-year senior getting all the fame, that's a leadership problem. That's not an NIL
quarterback.
problem.
And your quarterback too.
Like, who is the reason your team is good, right?
Big reason.
And so that's a leadership problem more than anything else that starts at the top. And so, if you're having that go on, you've got much bigger issues than on NIL. That's just the reality of it.
I think it will be prevalent, though, to your question, Chris. Like, I do think that there's going to be several teams that probably have issues. What teams those are? I tend to think it's more teams that are led by maybe less experienced coaches. I mean, like Josh Heupel's still a relatively new coach, so like that makes sense. I don't anticipate that happening at like Alabama with Saban, for instance, too often, right?
It won't happen again, I don't think. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think it'll happen
exactly.
again. Like we heard about it. We had Bama leaders talking about it last year, but it
Yeah,
happened, and now Saban's aware of it, and now you start putting in answers and you start dealing with it a little bit better, right? I don't
exactly.
like to your point, Ryan. I agree with Ryan. It's not going to become a systemic problem at Alabama, I don't believe.
Yeah, yeah,
But at other places, I think it will be. At A&M, it could definitely become
yeah.
that. No, and the other thing too is well, what teams are going to lose a couple games early? Because that's when it really starts to become a problem. Once that negativity of the because when you're winning, Ryan, you tend to overlook certain things, right? It's not a coincidence that we heard about the stuff at Tennessee like after they dropped a game or two, right? Like if they'd have beat Georgia, would they have really been concerned about what? No, they'd be thinking, dude, we're trying to play for a national championship, right? I mean, that's the other thing too is when you drop a couple games, all of a sudden, you know, that stuff starts festering. Well,
Things get
this happened because you're
magnified.
more worried
Yeah,
about your NIL money than you are about winning football
right,
games.
right.
Well, if your
Things get
quarterback just dropped
magnified
5
a lot
touchdown
more.
passes and 450 yards, and you just beat the number 3 team in the country by 20 points, you can do whatever you want, dude. We're going to just keep balling like that, right? I mean, it's just that's the nature of it too, you know.
Yep. We had Andrew Porter who says, "Why don't linebackers wear the big cowboy collar anymore, like number 49 Derek Curry used to for Notre Dame?"
I don't know, Ryan.
I used to wear the butterfly extender. I used to wear one of those guys. Yeah,
Well,
I used to love
I
it.
think number one, the way that tackling is taught now, you don't see as much of that as much
Yeah,
anymore. I mean, that's kind of against the rules a little bit. I would imagine, Ryan, the way that they're designing helmets and shoulder pads now, and the way that combined with the way you're teaching tackling, maybe there's just not as much of that head snapping back with so much room to work as before. I'm not really sure
I
why that is.
I
I've
would
never
say
worn one, so I
maybe
can't.
I would say also like it's a little more restricting as far as like your movements to a degree, right? So like in the space game of today, I probably want to be a little lighter and not
It's a good
as
point.
like built up,
It, it's
like
it's not
when I
that
was playing, I
box
was
game it used to be.
I was
Yeah,
about to say I was playing tackle to tackle, right? So like I didn't care if my neck couldn't move a ton side to side, you know
right,
what I mean? Because it's like I'm just navigating the track. It's like that's
right,
it, man.
right.
But if I have
That's a
to
good one.
flip my hips and open up and have to turn to cover hook curl consistently or work to the sideline, like
That's right.
it's a little bit of a different conversation at that point. Yeah.
That's right. Last one, Ryan. Here we go.
Okay. Archer mailbag with all the graduate seniors on defense. How much turnover will that side of the ball see in 2024? 9 or 10 new starters next year?
That I don't know. I mean, the only guys that were in. So of the starters listed on Notre Dame's starting lineup,
Yeah.
the only guys not eligible to come back next year are Javante Jean-Baptiste and DJ Brown. That's it. Cam Hart could come back for a 6th year because of the COVID stuff. I don't anticipate him doing it. I think they'll at least lose one starter at safety. They'll lose one starter corner. I do expect Cam to come back. Oh, and I don't think Thomas Brown has a 6th year either.
Thomas
But he
Harper.
wasn't listed. Thomas Harper. He doesn't have a
Yeah.
starting. He's not listed as a starter, even though I think he will be. And then Javante. I mean, all the linebackers could come back. I don't anticipate them all coming back. Um, so you could end up seeing worst case scenario for next year is you lose 3 starters along the defensive line. You lose 2 of your 3 starting linebackers and you lose 2 starters from your secondary. The position that hurts you the least is safety because
Yeah.
if all the guys that are 5th and 6th years go. Now Xavier Watts could go, but see, he's not a graduate senior. He is a senior who has graduated. There's a
Right.
difference, meaning he's a 4-year guy, right? He graduated early. He's in his senior year. He graduated early because he was an early enrollee. A lot of the other Jack Kaiser's a 5th year. JD's a 5th year. Nana's a 5th year. But like Riley Mills and Xavier Watts are early graduates. They're both true seniors that graduated early. They're both eligible to come back next season. I don't know that they will. The reality is, Ryan, is if they lose 9 or 10 starters on the defense for next year, it means this season went really well on defense.
Yep.
And Riley had a big year. Patelho had a big year. I mean, but the other thing too is this is why Marcus Freeman has been talking about we're going to play a lot of guys on defense. Because, let's just say Drake Bowen gets a 200 snaps this year on special teams and as a rotation linebacker. Yeah, he's going to be a new starter next year at Texas A&M, but that kid's going to have played some football, right? I mean, that's Jalen Sneed's going to play a bunch. Jaden Mickey's going to play a bunch. So, yeah, he may step in the lineup for Cam Hart next year. But when that happens, it's not like a new guy. Jaden A has started a game before. He started 2 games actually now, right? Because he started the bowl game and the USC game. I believe he started the bowl game. I know he started against USC. Yeah. And then he'll have been a guy that played a ton of football this year. So I think that's a big thing for Marcus Freeman this year. Is like, that's why I want to play. So let's say they lose Riley Mills, and let's say they lose Howard Cross, and they lose Jordan Toho because they have big years. Well, guess what? Jason Onye and Gabriel Rubio are going to have a lot of football under their belts. The Vipers behind Toho will have a lot of football under their belts. And that's why another reason why Coach Freeman wants to make sure guys are playing, not just – and he mentioned this to me. It's not just about – it's partly about this year, but it's also about building for the future. So that next year when you go to Texas A&M, you're not playing 9 starters who've hardly played any meaningful downs. Right. You don't want to be like you are at guard. Like part of the thing that hurt Notre Dame last year, their guard this year, is the fact that they just did not beat people the way they were supposed to last year, which means your backup guards got no playing time because you only had 2 games all year that you really put a team away, in my opinion. Hopefully that changes this year. And, maybe Charles Jagasol doesn't ever play meaningful downs, but if he plays like 15 snaps in 4 different games because you blew teams out, guess what? That kid got some experience. So if he does start next year, he's in a different situation. So that's kind of where you really ultimately where you want to be, Ryan, is you've got a bunch of new starters, but these are guys that have played a lot of football because then they're basically like starters. I mean, if a guy's rotating in, there's going to be times when Gabriel Rubio's working in with Howard Cross or Jason Onye's on the field with Riley Mills. Right. And so once the game starts, you've got your starters or whatever, but if you're playing 20 snaps a game as a rotation guy, you may not be a starter, but you are from an experience and from a mindset standpoint. You've got the same responsibility the starter has in today's game. So it's just a little bit like it back in the day, Ryan, when you and I were coming up, if you started, like that's what made like you like to reference the program thing, right? Like why was that so meaningful back then? Because that's the only way you played.
You were playing, yeah.
Right? Like, if you weren't a starter, you didn't really play that much. You have backup defensive linemen get a few snaps, but linebackers didn't used to come off the field. DBs didn't come off the field, and now it's just a little bit different than that. Yeah. So it's more so about, okay, we don't have a lot of starts coming back, but how many snaps and what kind of production is coming back? But yeah, there could be a case that Notre Dame could end up having a lot of, a lot of guys that aren't starting, but have played a lot of football.
Luckily, Notre Dame's defensive recruiting was especially good recently in 2023. Oh no, Drake Bowen has to play more, and Christian Gray has to play more. And
so let's take linebacker for an example, Ryan. Next year, let's say all 3 go pro for whatever reason. Some maybe aren't
I talked about this on the Monday show. I was like, man, could you imagine if it's sophomores Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, and then Jalen Sneed as a junior starter?
Nolan Ziegler, if Nolan will be back by then. Then you've got Kingston, and you're going to be all right. If you lose Cam Hart and Thomas Harper, you still got Christian, like you mentioned, Benjamin Morrison, Christian Gray, Jaden Mickey, Chance Tucker. Micah Bell will have 2 years. Leonard Moore is going to be on campus. That's why it's so, like you said, the job that Marcus Freeman has done recruiting. So you lose your 2 big ends, but then Tyson Ford, the light goes on for Tyson Ford this offseason. Guess what? You got a more talented kid in the starting lineup next year than you did this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of, the way you look at it is it's you've got some really talented younger players, and it started at the 22 class when Marcus Freeman showed up, and that's why I'm so bummed about Aiden Gobira going down, because he was really starting to flash in practice, man. He was like, okay, that's the dude that I thought could be a really good player. And then you see him get hurt, and like, man, that sucks, right? It doesn't affect him this year, the team this year, but it could maybe next year. But, let's say I guess we got to move Junior Tuihalamaka over to field end, with Brendan Vernon and Boubacar Traore. Okay. You know what I mean? Like, you're fine. Exactly. You know what I mean? Like, you're okay. And that's why it's so important to keep loading up. And, you're going to get Cole Mullins and maybe Logan Thomas and Bryce Young and Sean Silviano. And you just keep reloading, dude. And that's where Notre Dame is starting to be on defense. And that's an exciting thing, now offense has got to have another year like that, because the offensive class in 22 wasn't as good, at least not at all positions. You were pretty darn good at running back, pretty darn good at tight end, and your offensive line was, has a chance to be pretty darn good, with some guys there, but you came up short on numbers at receiver. and quarterback wasn't, Steve. I hope Steve proves me wrong, but just he was a solid quarterback, but not a great quarterback. But 23 is loaded, 24 is loaded. So let's say Jaden Thomas has a big year and goes pro. Oh, hey, Braylon James, you ready to help?
Sure.
Hey, welcome to the team, Cam Williams. Exactly.
Right.
Hey, Micah Gilbert, you look like a veteran. You're the most muscular
Sure.
receiver you're going to have next year. And that's just kind of where you want to be, man. I mean, that's where you want your program to be. And, you lose both of your starting tackles. Hey, Tosh Baker, Emil Wagner, Charles Jagasol, Sullivan Absher, you guys ready to go? Gilby Lambert, you guys ready to go? And that's why recruiting is so important. I mean, think about how many Georgia lost 15 dudes from their first championship team. 15 dudes.
Yep. And then went
out the next year and did something the team before never did. I mean, I still think the 21 team was the way more talented team, just top to bottom, in my opinion. But guess what the 22 team did that the 21 team didn't do? Went undefeated. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's just a different animal, man. So anyway, Ryan, that's gonna do it for today's show, man. You want to take us out of here? Good. I want to just read this and then take us out of here, Ryan.
Yep. We had a comment from Jimmy James that says, thanks for getting us through the off season. Looking forward to a great season and many great shows. Go Irish and off to the airport. I'm very jealous that he's going to the game, by the way, Jimmy, but thank you so much for the shout out. We appreciate everyone. The off season is about nearly over, but we have the rest of the week to get you all prepared for Saturday when Notre Dame kicks off 2:30 Eastern time against the Navy Midshipmen. So before you leave the Irish Breakdown podcast today, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and hit that notification bell. We'll be here at 1 o'clock the rest of the week, as well as IB Nation Sports Talk at night. So make sure that you check in there. That notification bell will also alert you when we are live for our post-game show on Saturday. So sign boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com as well for any latest recruiting and team intel as we move closer and closer, only a few days away from the season officially kicking off. So
we got a couple things coming for him, Ryan, on the podcast. We're going to have something coming up here soon with Ryan that's going to be a little bit different. That's not going to be a live show, but a recorded show. And then we have something we're trying to work on special for Navy. So another reason, Ryan, why you need to have those notifications on, because you'll get those when we go live with those as well. And you'll also get them on the podcast app. So just make sure you're also subscribing to our Irish Breakdown and CFB Nation podcast platforms.
Yep. 5-star reviews are also very much appreciated on those podcast platforms. So that's Brian Driscoll. I'm Ryan Roberts. We thank you all again so much for joining us today on this Notre Dame versus Navy preview on the Irish Breakdown podcast.